Jackie, you turning it over to me now? You're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, no, over to you, Tony.
All right, Jack, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I want to welcome everybody. I would say good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever in the world you may be at this time. I want to welcome everybody to our second virtual summit for ASBPA. If you recall, this time last year, we were scrambling to figure out how to do this kind of a meeting remotely, virtually, and the team came through admirably last year, as they did again this year. We're hoping that this is our last virtual venture. We're hoping that by the fall, we all feel pretty comfortable traveling, and we're planning on having our fall conference in New Orleans live and in person. So this is the last time we have to be remotely connected, I hope, for a very long time. In any event, I'm the president of ASBPA, and I want to welcome everybody to the summit for this year. We hope you're all safe and healthy and have gotten through this terrible year unscathed and ready to move onward in a better 2021. We are grateful for your participation in 2021 Coastal Summit. And over the next 3 days, we will wade into new waters as we are thematically moving forward into many things in life, wading into new waters. We're going to be discussing policy and the best practices for our coast in years unlike any in history, in a year unlike any in history. I am going to take unusual for me. I'm going to pretty much read from the script that was handed to me because there's a lot of thank yous that go into putting this on between the committee, the leadership committee of the committee itself, and the sponsors. So I'm going to be reading a little bit here. Again, I usually like to just speak from my feet, but our special thanks do go out to the summit co-chairs and steering committee for putting the summit together. The co-chairs are Lynette Kadosh, Brian Caulfield, and Jack Coben. Committee members are Joan Pope, Nicole Elko, Annie Mercer, Eve Eisman, Pete Seidel, Dan Adams, Lee Wisher, and Nick Brown. And we want to thank our co-sponsor committee, our sponsorship committee chair, Dan Adams, along with the co-chairs, Lynette, Brian, Jack, Jerry Moan, and Jim White. Without the generous support of our sponsors, the summit, along with so much of ASBPA, and really the heart and soul of what makes us tick is how the sponsors support us in our advocacy work and in most endeavors we have. This would not be possible if we didn't have the generous contributions of our sponsors. We value their commitment over the course of the year, and particularly in the summit, and we're grateful to have such a strong supportive group of Coastal Summit sponsors. Please visit our summit website to view the digital media and contact information for all of our sponsors. There you will also find the day's agenda, and I'm sure most of you have probably already discovered that. You've gotten here probably through that process. You'll see the day's agenda, but during the webinar, we will limit each speaker's introduction to save time and encourage you to visit the summit website for full bios of our esteemed guests. And we really have some notable guests working with us this week. We've organized the program to provide you with maximum content while offering several options to engage with speakers and attendees. We are holding our small group agency meetings online, again, for the second year. We've had great successes in personal meetings, but I found last year's virtual meetings to be very rewarding. So we hope you join us when we meet with FEMA, NOAA, BOEM, and CORE HQ. If you signed up for any of these meetings, you should have received an email on how to connect into those meetings. During the summit, if you have any questions for speakers after presentations, please post them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I suspect that most of us are Zoom professionals at this point. We've spent our lives over the last year in Zoom platforms, so not unfamiliar with you to raise your hand, ask a question, engage in the chat, and participate. It's very informative and much more beneficial if you do that. Raise your hand and then wait to be unmuted. I'd like to now turn it over to Jack, today's moderator, Jack Coben, today's moderator, and who will introduce our first speaker. Jack, take it away.
All right, thank you. Just a little more about myself. I'm a project manager with Fugro in Baton Rouge, and had the great opportunity to work on a number of coastal projects and work with a number of advocacy groups like ASBPA and be a part of their organization. It's been a truly rewarding thing over the last few years, and it's a great pleasure to be here as the moderator for the first day of the 2021 summit. Without further ado, let me just jump into our first speaker, Major General William Butch Graham, who's the Deputy Commanding General for Civil and Emergency Operations for the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Major General Graham, rather, received his commission from the Reserve Officer Training Corps in 1989 from the University of Pittsburgh. Go Pitt! He's an engineer officer who's commanded soldiers at all levels up to division. And with that, I'd like to introduce him to give his presentation.
He's having just a little bit of trouble logging on.
While General Graham's making his way on, just want to take a minute to introduce myself. My name's Brad Pickle. I know that I've met many of you all. We're one of the 2 new managing directors. I just want to take a minute to honor Kate Gooderham and Ken Gooderham. Many of us have had the pleasure of working with Kate and Ken over the years as managing directors of the ASBPA. But my wife, Leslie, and I, she's not on the camera, as you can tell right now, but we have had the privilege the last few months since the beginning of January to come on board as your managing directors. And although we're not in the program, we knew there would be an opportunity for us to come on and say hello, to put a face to the name for some of those who I haven't had the chance yet to meet, and also to welcome General Graham to be with us right now, and thank all of you who are attending and all of our speakers today. And it is my understanding that he is ready to join us.
Okay. Dr. Cohen, can you hear me okay? It's General Graham here.
Loud and clear.
All right, super. Well, thank you very much for letting me join you today. I took a look at I think it's 3-day agenda that you've got, and it looks like it's going to be a great meeting. I'm sure everybody would much rather be here in Washington, D.C. than scattered throughout amongst Zoomdom, but my hat's off to you for figuring out how to keep the great work that ASBPA does moving. First and foremost, ASBPA's got a great reputation for doing an awful lot of good work throughout the years. Dr. Elko, who sits on or had sat on the Coastal Engineering Research Board that the Corps of Engineers run until we kind of disbanded all of those boards when the new administration rolled in, and we're still in the process of reforming them, and we will reform those. She's taught me an awful lot about the great work that goes on here, and I know that she's got some presentations later, and the one that probably interested me the most was, I think it was white wine and WRDA, which I thought was a good way to approach that key bit of authorizing legislation. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. But white wine and WRDA is going to stick with me, I think, here for a while. Hey, so when I went through ASBPA's mission statement, I'm not going to tell you something you all don't know, but I'm just going to reemphasize it here because I think your mission and our mission certainly coincide. And so as it reads, to preserve and protect and enhance our coasts by merging science and public policy. And we know we are one of the nexuses for that science and public policy. So if you take nothing else from from what I'm going to speak to you today for the next 20 to 25 minutes. It's we need your feedback on, do we have the science right, and do we have the public policy right? And I'll talk through a few of those things that on kind of everybody's radar screen right now. But just want to reemphasize, if you think we've got the science wrong, please let us know. If you think we've got the policy wrong, please let us know. And I'll go through some ways that you can do that most effectively. So what I hope to do is to talk for about 10 to 12 minutes and then leave the rest of the balance of the time to answer any of your questions. I've got Mr. Joe Vitri from our Coastal Engineering Planning Center to help me with all the hard questions, but we certainly want to listen to what your questions are and to gain whatever feedback we can. As they say, feedback's a gift, and we appreciate that gift. We know to keep getting that gift, we got to actually do something with the feedback that you've given us. Okay, so Jasmine, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so what's new? What's on the horizon? Two things I'd like to point out to you. One is we've got record appropriations. You can see we've got 29 studies that we got to finish this year, a whole bunch of construction contracts that we got to get awarded on, and a whole bunch that we got to finish. We've got great appropriations for to maintain the systems that we've got, and all that is on top of the emergency supplementals from the big hurricanes back in 18 and 19. And I say that as these are the kind of problems we like to have. We've got a lot of permission and a lot of funding, so a lot of authorizations and a lot of appropriations, and then so now we just got to deliver. We've got to deliver for you. The bedrock of all of this, again going back to your all's mission statement, is what we're building, what we're studying, is all that based on sound science and sound engineering. And again, we value your input here. So on the policy side, I'm going to talk a little bit on the next slide or next couple slides on the recently passed WRDA 2020, some more authorizations that we want to figure out how to get those new authorizations and figure out how to put those to use for you all. And the devil's in the details on that, and that is on implementing instructions. And I'll talk through where we could use your feedback to make sure we get those implementing instructions correctly. And then speak to you a little bit about changes that we're making right now within the Civil Works portion of the Corps of Engineers. And again, I sound like a broken record here, but we value your feedback on, are we changing the stuff that needs to change, and are we changing fast enough? Jasmine, if you would please go to the next slide. So the kind of the framework that we've put, making the changes we think we need to make sure that the Corps continues to deliver for you. We put that in the framework of revolutionized civil works. General Spellman started that when he had my job, and he certainly wants Mr. Lee and I to continue that as he's fleeted up to be the chief of engineers. So it's always good to have your boss know more about what you do than you do. So that's my cross to bear. But for you all, it's absolutely fantastic to have the chief of engineers just come off the Civil Works desk, because that means there's going to be a lot of continuity in what we're doing to get better. There's going to be a lot of continuity in what we're doing to deliver for all of you. So these 4 quadrants we've got there, 2 that I want to highlight. First is accelerating project delivery. And you see some bullets down there. The one on risk-informed decision-making, it's kind of that might be a business school word, kind of like holistic and synergy. Risk gets thrown around an awful lot these days. So let me put that into practical terms, because we know what you've asked us to do is to take the authority and appropriations we've been given and to get that to work for for you. So on risk-informed decision-making, one of the risks we're taking right now is in the Mississippi River down ahead of passes, where we're contracting industry dredges before we know how bad the spring flood season is going to be. What we had been doing in years past is we were kind of waiting to see what the floods would look like and see how much shoaling happened down in the lower Mississippi. And then we would go out under pretty much emergency situations and try to find more hopper dredges to come in and help us keep the river open. And one of the challenges with that is the industry, as you'd expect from business people, don't like to just have their dredges sitting tied up to a dock. They have those amazingly capable machines and the crews that run them out doing work as often as they can. And so we would have to pull off another job, and those oftentimes were working on shore protection missions or shore protection jobs. And we would have to think through pulling, what was the greater need, keeping the Mississippi River open or delaying building the shore protection along the coasts. And General Spellman realized that we had to stop doing business that way. And so what we've done last year and we're doing again this year is we're taking some risk that there won't be a lot of shoaling in the river by putting under contract the industry dredges. And so that takes that big dynamic that we might pull the hopper dredges off some of the coastal work. That takes that off the equation because we've already got the right capability dedicated to keeping the Mississippi River open. And then the dredges that are working on the coastal protection missions or projects can continue to do that work on the schedules that we've already worked so hard to work out with the folks that live on those coasts, because we know how impactful that work is. So that's one example that I wanted to bring up to you all, and how we are working to get better, taking on a little risk to make sure we're delivering wisely for you all. And we get to questions and answers. We'd be happy to take any feedback on that you might have. On the bottom right quadrant, we realize that we've absolutely have to keep partnering better with you all. Again, so tremendously value the ability and the opportunity to come speak with you here today. Okay, Jasmine, could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, spoke before that the authorizing committee has been doing a wonderful job on keeping WRDA on track every 2 years, and they came through again in 2020. And we know that your efforts to let them know that these WRDA bills are important is one of the key reasons that we continue to keep these WRDAs on track every 2 years. So we're in great shape. WRDA 2020 has a whole bunch more authorities in there. Now, as you all know, that doesn't mean that the appropriations are always going to follow. So, but it does give us the authority. Now we just got to make the case for the appropriations as well. So near and dear to this audience's heart is for the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund that allows us, again, gives us the authority to go into an additional $2 billion perhaps, subject to appropriations of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. And so what that means for all of us is that we expect to be able to do more. And we are gearing up to be ready to make sure we got the right staff on board to be able to do that work. 46 projects authorized for construction, and if all that gets appropriated, that's $15 billion worth of additional construction. That has now been authorized. 27 more studies came along for that. So as I spoke to earlier, feedback is a gift, and we're asking you for some feedback, and that is to add your voice to the public listening sessions. We started last Tuesday and are going to go on for the next 5 weeks on Tuesday, where the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works and then the Corps of Engineers, where we listen to you on what you would like to see in the implementing instructions for these new authorities. Unfortunately, the timing for our second listening session, which is this afternoon, as soon as I'm done speaking here, I'll join this session. And it's on a topic that's near and dear to your heart, flood risk and coastal storm risk reduction. And we know many of you are going to, as expected, stay with this program, and we encourage you to do that. So what I'd say is for these other 3 listening sessions on 30 March, 6 April, and 13 April, you can join, even though we've put topics on the 30 March and 6 April session, you can join any of those sessions to talk any topic. Again, the Civil Works leadership team will be there, and the Assistant Secretary of the Army's team will be there as well to make sure we're capturing your thoughts. One piece that and there's a whole bunch, as you well know, and you're going to talk about in White Wine for WERDA, there's a whole bunch in here that we got to figure our way through. One piece in particular that I'd like to draw your attention to is some additional authorities, some pilot projects on how to better deal with disadvantaged communities. As many of you know, oftentimes our projects are judged on their benefit to cost ratio, on the national economic development benefits, and the poor disadvantaged communities, the value of those facilities don't often compete well using that as the yardstick. So with the Biden administration coming on board, putting EJ as one of its key topics, we certainly want to get your thoughts on how we can get the policy right to make sure we're working to protect some of these vulnerable communities. As many of you know, I spent a lot of time commanding the North Atlantic Division of the Corps up in the New York City area, and got to see firsthand some of the challenges with particularly the Back Bay flooding. These are often poor and impoverished communities who are greatly vulnerable. And we need your help to figure out the right policies to be able to protect those vulnerable citizens. Okay, Jasmine, would you please go to the next slide? Okay, so here's this topic is near and dear to everyone's heart, and it's certainly has the full attention of the Biden administration. One of the first acts that the new administration did was Executive Order 14008, which is tackling climate crisis at home and abroad. Now, the Corps, we've been working on climate change at least since the 70s. I think it was one of our first paper that came out. And for anybody that was reading the news over the weekend, you might have seen some clips on some ice cores that were taken from Greenland back in the 60s when the Army was doing some research work and some potential investigations to see if that would be a suitable place to put intercontinental ballistic missiles. We learned that it wasn't, but a lot of good science came out of there. And the key researchers on there that pulled a lot of those ice core samples and a lot of that early climate change work was our Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory that's up in New Hampshire outside of Dartmouth. So we've been at the Corps has been at the ground level on climate change for a long time, and our marching orders from the new administration are absolutely clear, is that we need to re-energize and revitalize these efforts going forward. Now, I say that to this group, and I'm going to bring in Joe Vitri for just a second. And when I get to I'm going to bring in Joe in just a second. Because he and I and the rest of the coastal community team here in the Corps, we need your input. We know we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. There's an awful lot going out of great work going on out in the various research institutions, in the policy think tanks, and in industry. and we need to make sure that the Corps of Engineers is leveraging all of your talents. So Joe, I'm gonna bring you up for a minute or two just to kind of talk our current efforts on coastal resilience. Joe, you're next.
Hello, sir. How are you? Hopefully you can hear me well. Thank you. Well, right now, it's pretty safe to say we're pretty much involved on every coast of the United States, from San Francisco to Texas to Florida to the Northeast. And I would like to tell you that the problems are unique to each area, but they're really not. They're exactly the same. The trouble that we're having these days is that the tools that we're currently using constantly need to be adapted to fit the changing condition. Obviously, the West Coast is not the same as the Great Lakes, nor is it the same as the East Coast. So we're working very hard with CHL and ERDC, developing our next generation of tools, modifying the ones that we currently have in place. We are very much concerned with and focused on risk-based decision-making, as General Graham mentioned. These new paradigm that we find ourselves in with 3x3 requires a lot of on-the-feet thinking by some very smart people. And as General Graham points out, we don't corner the market on that particular area. So having said that, we've always utilized and enjoyed our friendship with the ASBPA, and we hopefully will continue that, because certainly as we embark on the challenges of compound flooding, both from storm surge as well as riverine flooding, coupled with a lot of the work being done now in the back bays, the job has gotten a lot more complex than what we have seen over the past 2 decades or so that I've been doing this. Certainly putting sand on an open ocean coastline and a sandy beach is really not so much really the focus these days, even though that's what we do a real lot of, but the challenges are really in the back bay and how we deal with compound flooding. So again, just an open invitation. You can reach me at that link. You could always get my team on the phone. And certainly we are available to help out on any stretch of coastline anywhere in the United States. So thank you, sir. Hopefully that's just a quick overview.
No, that was perfect, Joe. Thank you. Jasmine, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, in putting those, as I spoke to earlier, Word of 2020 allowed us the authority to get to more of those funding. And you can see in that second set of bullets, the allocation that money was suggested that it goes to. And we'll see what comes out of the appropriations bill. But this does give us the ability to reach more funding and to get more done. And our commitment to you is that we'll do that transparently and certainly in collaboration with all of the stakeholders. Okay. Let's go ahead to the next slide, which should be the last slide. So here's some links. The Revolutionized Civil Works, again, that's the leadership here within the Corps making the changes that we believe we need to make based on feedback we've received from groups like this. There's a link on how to get to that. Third bullet down is a link to the podcasts we're doing, telling our story. And I'd never done a podcast before. I learned that it doesn't hurt, and that these are useful tools to communicate where folks are communicating these days and age. I kind of grew up, as perhaps many of you have, in the days of newsletters, et cetera, and that certainly isn't where we're at now. So this old dog is trying to learn some new tricks as well. We want to make sure that we're communicating where you and your members are. And so if you find that we're being ineffective at doing that, please, again, give us your feedback. So I know that was kind of fast and furious. Jasmine, if you would please go to the next slide. And as that's working its way through, that is to pretty much put a bow on it and say we value your feedback and would certainly appreciate getting some of that from you right now. And so Joe and I are standing by to answer any questions you might have.
General, this is Tony Pratt. I'm the president of ASBPA. Jack, I'm sorry, I didn't know if you were jumping in there or not.
No, go ahead.
Joe, good to hear your voice again. It's been a couple of years since I've had the honor of hearing you speak. Nice to see you, and thank you both for joining us today. I do have, General, I have a question for you. We are sadly missing, I'm in Delaware. I've had a career with the state of Delaware here and worked closely with Senator Carper's office still in a capacity after retirement. And I'm, a bad conflict with the listening session going on this afternoon on coastal flood risk management. Will we have an opportunity following these listening sessions to see what transpired? Will there be some kind of a posting of the summary of the meeting, the questions asked and answered, and how we can follow up a little bit with that? I appreciate your invitation to join the other listening sessions and join in, but we don't want to recover ground that's already been covered and maybe striking us something new. So if you could address that a little bit, appreciate it.
Tony, certainly we are putting together kind of the synopsis of all of the listening sessions and what our takeaways are, what we're hearing. And we'll make sure that we work through this group so that you know where that information is going to be posted. And again, we know that we put buckets out here for these listening sessions, just to navigation or coastal flood risk management, just to add a little structure to but we absolutely welcome folks coming in to talk about any topic that WRDA might touch. And if it's ground we plowed before, the audience might be different, and they would tremendously value probably hearing these thoughts as well. So please don't feel shy to join any of these sessions to talk about topics that are important to you.
And thank you. Appreciate that.
We have one question in the chat here. It says, "What is an emerging?" Sorry, word just disappeared on me. What is an emerging harbor?
So the question is what is an emerging harbor? That's a good question. One I probably should know an answer to, and I don't. So you're going back to the word Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. I don't want to speak out of turn, so we'll get you an answer to that question and ask you to post that as well. Unless, Joe, do you know the answer to that question? I'm going to guess you don't, but perhaps.
No, sir, it's rather unique language. No.
Okay,
Well,
maybe that's.
yeah, well,
So
Maybe that's by intent.
we always circle back to that one, I guess, at a later date. Here's another question from Blaine on the chat box. What is the ACOE currently exploring in new technologies to extend the life soft nourishments, given the financial and environmental cost of doing them?
Okay. Joe, you want to start off on that one?
So that's a question that General Graham and I grappled with extensively when we were in New York together. There was a pretty interesting graphic that we had actually put together at his request that basically had kind of illustrated post Sandy how much money and how much sediment we would need to maintain and keep up the portfolio projects that were just constructed during Sandy. Clearly, we have a competition for a scarce resource here. Obviously, it's the resource both is money, time, and I'll even add in sediment. And as you know, some parts of the country are sediment starved. So some of the things that we're doing now and we've been evaluating over the last couple of years is, we sort of veered away. The period of the 60s and 70s were heavily involved in structures along the coastline. We veered away from that and went more towards a more natural setting, letting, not impeding littoral drift. And what we're finding now is that in some areas, especially with higher erosion rates, given the challenges of finding sediment, we seem to be focusing back in again on newer type structures in use. So that's one of the items that we're doing. We're looking at also some contractual vehicles that could be deployed so that we could group contracts together, save on the MOB and DMOB, things of that sort that we're working. Like to think more regionally. We've been working with our contracting folks on some, initiatives in that area, trying to stretch out and use sort of a more disciplined approach. Typically in the days of congressional ads, it was whoever gave us the money, we went out and we ran and did it. Now we're looking at more of a database type of operation with CSPI, where we're actually looking at need, we're monitoring a lot more, and certainly making decisions based upon immediate need as opposed to sort of well, I'll just put it bluntly, politics. So we're trying to be science-based decision-making at its finest. But again, what we have available as tools are still the same old tools we've always had, but with a little different twist. Over.
And what I would just add on there for Joe is, and he spoke to it, is looking not just at individual projects, but kind of looking large regionally, and the kind of these efforts at regional settlement management, where we're thinking kind of big picture and long term, is, I think, key to keeping the costs down. Because we know that once we put the coastal storm risk management systems in place, that citizens are in industries are counting that protection is going to work and it's going to be there. And so we've got to make sure that as the renourishment cycles happen, that we're able to do that efficiently and keep those systems in place. Because again, folks, once we build it, they're going to count on it being there.
All right. I guess I will just throw in there real quick. Someone replied that an emerging harbor is just a low use harbor. It's apparently a change of terminology. But I guess we've got about 6 minutes left for the next session. So I'll get one or two more questions maybe. Kim Garvey says, what is the best way for the California chapter of ASBPA to influence appropriations? For example, how can we push for funding of the construction of the Southern California Surfside, Sunset, and San Clemente Beach nourishment projects?
Okay. So thank you for that question. And the two main mechanisms I'd say is make sure that the local district certainly understands how important that project is to you, and certainly make sure your local elected officials understand that as well. So those two groups, so that one can push, one can pull, and we all know what your equities are in that project.
All right. I guess one last question here from an anonymous attendee. Will the Corps of Engineers issue guidance on and start following the new principles requirements that encourage analyzing co-benefits of projects to help balance the consideration of alternatives? Okay.
So I'll take a swing at that, and then we'll see if Joe can come in over the top if I get this wrong. When we take a look at what we should invest in, we had been primarily focusing on the benefit cost ratio according to the National Economic Development benefits. That was one aspect. Our last Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, before he left, gave us written policy direction that's in line with PRNGs that are coming out, that have come out already from CEQ, that says we should look at the other three benefits as well: the regional economic development benefits, the environmental quality benefits, and other societal effects that come along. So what we're working on is putting all four of those benefits on the table to make sure that we're capturing how valuable this project could potentially be to society, not just looking at national economic development benefits. And I think in terms of environmental justice, that when we talk about the disadvantaged communities, that will be what we're going to base our science and our engineering and our formulation on to work towards getting authority to have those projects compete well in various budgets. So Joe.
Sir, you did pretty good. That was very good. We do have right now working guidance, as Major General Grant points out. It will be discussed in every decision document that we prepare. The ones that were late in the preparation cycle will probably have more of a qualitative discussion. The ones that are more newer will have a little bit more robust discussion. I also want to point out too, this is really, I mean, there's multiple benefits to doing this, and it's not so much always at the federal level. State, local governments also fund a lot of these projects, and they really need to understand what these project studies do for them locally and regionally. So it's equally as important, both for us at the federal level and also at the local level, to clearly identify what those benefit streams are and where they may lie. The challenge, of course, is that we're always comparing a quantitative benefit, you know, BCR, with maybe a qualitative benefit. And then you have the issue of how far you can actually go to chase that qualitative benefit. So the guidance right now is such that it's fluid. We're still working on it, but you will see every decision document has a robust discussion on every one of those accounts. Over.
All right. I guess real quick, there's one last kind of yes or no question here. We've heard rumors that the restart of the New Jersey Back Bay Coastal Study is coming. Is this something that is about to start back up that you know of?
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. Yes, is the short answer. It is
Okay.
Restarting. Yes.
Well, great. I think we covered everybody's questions. We're right on time. So with that, I'll go ahead and say thank you guys, for your time, for being here live with us today and answering some questions with our attendees and with the panelists. And it's been great having you.
It was our pleasure. And I learned some stuff too. Now I know what harbor is.
An emerging harbor is.
And now I learned as well. So to the entire team out there, we appreciate what you do and grade our paper. You know, our charge is to deliver quality projects on time, on budget. And if we're not, hold us to task. If we're not basing those projects on sound science, or if we've got the policy wrong, please let us know. And you can always email me. You can always email Joe. But thank you again for your time today. It was our honor to be here.
Thank you so much.
Bye now.
And with that, I will now turn it over to Nick Brown, who will be announcing some awards here as part of the Coastal Summit. But before that, I'd like to just quickly thank Manson Construction.
All right. Can you hear me and see me okay, Jack?
Yeah, go ahead.
Fantastic. So as Jack said, I'm Nick Brown. I'm the awards chair for our Coastal Summit for 2021. And I'd like to again thank Manson Construction Company because they have generously sponsored all of our 2021 Coastal Summit awards. Let's see if, there we go. The first award we have to announce today is the Army Corps of Engineers Employee Award. This award honors a member of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers who's contributed to the cause of beach management and preservation. This year's recipient of the award is Dylan Davis. He's the Coastal Program Manager of the South Atlantic Division. In the nomination for Mr. Davis, it was stated that he has been one of the most exemplary employees at the Corps that the individual has worked with. He has an excellent track record, and he's an excellent representative of the mission to preserve, protect, and enhance our coast by merging science and public policy. Mr. Davis oversees all aspects of the coastal storm damage reduction and navigation program throughout the southeastern United States and the Caribbean. His nominator praised his critical assessment of each and every project, along with his genuine curiosity about why a project might not have worked so that he can develop tools to improve in the future and make better projects. Finally, Mr. Davis has shown that this is the way it's always been done. It's not an acceptable reason to do something. And that there's always room for improvement, excuse me. Congratulations to Mr. Davis again, and thank you for all your hard work preserving, protecting, and improving our coasts. And there's 2 images here of Mr. Davis receiving his award, and he happened to be there with Colonel Kelly at the same time. So now I'll be announcing our second set of awards this afternoon. We have our congressional awards, and we have 2 recipients this year of the Friend of the Coast Awards. This award is given to a representative for a shorter term or project-specific contribution. And more recently, it's been a way to highlight representatives who are creating a strong track record of supporting and preserving and protecting our coasts. The first recipient, click too quickly. First recipient this year is Representative Ted Lieu from California's 33rd Congressional District. His nominators noted that since assuming office in the U.S. House of Representatives in 2015, Congressional Representative Ted Lieu has been a strong voice and supporter of environmental protection and a firm opponent of coastal drilling. Representative Lieu has been a champion of protecting marine life and waters of the Pacific Ocean since taking office. Some of his most notable accomplishments include helping secure funding for the Harbor South Bay project. He also announced the passage of his bill, the Santa Monica Mountain National Recreation Area Boundary Adjustment Study Act, and he co-authored the Climate Solutions Act in 2015. He also co-sponsored the Coastal and Marine Economies Protection Act. Congratulations, Representative Lieu, and thank you for your hard work preserving, protecting, and improving our coastlines. And we have a short video from Representative Lieu.
Hello, I'm very honored to receive the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association 2021 Friend of the Coast Award. I'm grateful for all of your continued work in protecting our oceans, coasts, and marine life, and I'm proud to stand beside you as we work to craft the future of coastal policy. My congressional district spans the iconic Santa Monica Bay coastline from the Palos Verdes Peninsula up through Malibu. Its natural beauty is rivaled by few other places, and the tourism, recreation, and other ocean-related industries flourish because of it. Climate change is the greatest existential threat to humankind. Warming ocean temperatures and rising sea levels threaten our shores and coastlines, their natural ecosystems, and the communities that rely on them. It is critically important that we support robust coastal resiliency policies and invest in efforts to protect our shores, ports, and harbors. Locally, I'm also working to protect Los Angeles shores. Several weeks ago, the House passed my bill to study the expansion of the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area to include the Santa Monica Bay water of the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area to include the Santa Monica Bay watershed. Expanding the area would allow the watershed to benefit from federal resources, enable better conservation, especially along the coastline. The preservation of our shores and beaches will continue to be a priority as we address the environmental and infrastructure legislation in the 117th Congress. I look forward to working with ASBPA on legislative initiatives, especially those coming out of the House of Representatives, which are focused on infrastructure. Thank you again for your award and your advocacy.
And again, we'd like to congratulate Representative Lieu on the Friend of the Coast Award and thank him for protecting our coasts and making sure that we are improving them in the best way that we can. Our second Friend of the Coast Award for 2021 is to Senator Cory Booker. Since joining the Senate, Cory Booker has sponsored or co-sponsored over 50 bills focused on environmental stewardship and resilience, including renewable offshore wind energy, land and wildlife conservation, marine mammal protection, oil and gas drilling prohibitions in coastal waters, flood risk management and mitigation, climate change resilience, and environmental justice, just to name a few. The Senator's legislative initiatives parallel and support the mission of the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association to preserve, protect, and enhance our coast by merging science and policy. He was very strongly nominated because of his track record of advancing policy and to help our beaches and coastlines. Congratulations to Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, and thank you for your tireless work preserving, protecting, and improving our coastlines. We now have a few words from Cory Booker.
The ASBPA, I want to thank you for this incredible honor. I want to thank Margot Walsh and Tom Harrington as well. They are two of great champions of New Jersey's shore. And they know, like I know, the urgency of our work. We have real challenges before us. It's Martin Luther King that said, we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a common garment of destiny. We know that this is an interwoven world in which we live. And if we neglect our beaches and our shores, if we allow environmental degradation or the ravages of climate change to persist without addressing them, we as an entire nation are threatened. I'm honored and proud to be working on real legislation initiatives, and efforts to join with you in the important work of protecting our beaches and our shores. So much of our life as humanity, from our economic well-being to our health and wellness, to our joy and our high quality of life, is fully and deeply affected by what happens to our oceans, shores, and beaches. God, we are in a challenging time, but I am a prisoner of hope, and I know that American history is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of impossible things. So let us continue to be bold in our vision for our beaches and shores. Let us be uncompromising in our work and dedication to our common ideals. And let us believe that we can attain victories today so that generations to come can have the joy and be sourced by the power and the grandeur and the wonder of our oceans, of our beaches, and our shore. Thank you, everyone, for this honor. I, in turn, honor you and give you my gratitude. I look forward to continuing in partnership, in alliance, and in love of the work that we have to do. Take care now.
All right, I'd like to thank Senator Cory Booker and Representative Liu for both sending in some videos, as they were not able to be here today. And then lastly, I would like to turn it back over to Jack as we exit into a 15-minute break soon.
All right. Thanks. As Nick said, we have a 15-minute break now. So we'll be back here at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, or 12:30 if you're in Central like myself. And we'll be having Colin O'Mara speaking to us about some of the work that he's been doing with the National Wildlife Federation. So without that, take a break and we'll see you guys soon. All right. It's 1:30, and I hope everyone had a good break. Managed to get a cup of coffee or whatever you needed to kind of refresh yourselves for the afternoon session. But welcome back either way. Um, as we mentioned before the break, our next speaker is Mr. Colin O'Mara. Colin serves as the president and CEO of the National Wildlife Federation, America's largest wildlife conservation organization with 53 state and territorial affiliates, including nearly 6 million hunters, anglers, birders, gardeners, hikers, paddlers, and wildlife enthusiasts of all kinds. Um, Under O'Mara's leadership, the National Wildlife Federation is focused on recovering America's wildlife, ranging from bison and bighorn sheep to pollinators like monarch butterflies and native bees, improving the management of and access to public lands, and restoring America's water bodies, advancing environmental education, including Ranger Rick magazine, which I just like to say I grew up reading that one. So very, very much appreciate your work there. It's been a source of inspiration for, I'm sure, many children, including myself, way, way back. But thank you very much for being here. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jack. And it really is great to be with all of you. I'm really excited about this opportunity because, frankly, I've loved the partnership we've had with the organization over the last few years. And I got to say, I was kind of trained at the knee of my little one just joined us. I was so I was just kind of being photobombed. I apologize for the massacre that's happening off screen. I was trained on kind of all things coastal and beach preservation by the great Tony Pratt, and when I became Secretary of Natural Resources in Delaware in 2009, I'll admit I knew absolutely nothing. And over my tenure as Secretary of Natural Resources, I saw the evolution of the thinking, of the kind of best ideas coming out of your community, how that's translated into this much better understanding of risk, a better understanding of how to use natural infrastructure where possible. Sage opportunities, kind of a combination of gray and green together in some places. And also how that thinking and the great work that you've all done at the local and state level really transformed federal policy. I couldn't be more proud over the past few years of watching how the Water Resources Development Act, for example, has evolved from kind of natural infrastructure being almost a nicety, kind of a small part and almost like a pilot project kind of mold, to actually being front and center and being on equal footing with kind of more man-made infrastructure alternatives. And that's a hell of an evolution, right? That's a pretty exciting evolution because we know that the investments that we make in your communities and in the projects that you've identified, they save $6 to $10 for every dollar we spend. We know that the natural systems are a little more dynamic and can kind of absorb a punch as we're seeing more and more extreme weather events and greater precipitation levels and increasing sea level rise. But it's almost funny. Looking back, I guess 10, 11 years ago, a lot of things that I think we take for granted now, we're not kind of common sense among at least a lot of the political actors, even though obviously, all the practitioners on the ground have been saying these things for years. And frankly, that would not have happened if it wasn't for ASBPA. It's that simple. If it wasn't for all of your advocacy, kind of making the case for those smarter ways to do things and, better ways on both on the engineering and the geoscience, as well as on the economics. It's quite an accomplishment. And I really enjoyed working, with the different leaders of the organization at the time, Derek and others. I know you guys are going in your search right now. But it is a special role that you all play, and the fact that you're able to bring together folks from across different regions, across different political landscapes, across different all different kinds of communities, and speak with a common voice, I think is a big deal. And frankly, the package that we pulled together last year, in WRDA, in the 2020 WRDA, had just so many critical provisions that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for your leadership. And I'm going to brag about my team a little bit. And many of you know Jesse Ritter from the National Wildlife Federation, who's an absolute rock star, working behind the scenes, folks like Melissa Samet from our team as well, working with Senator Carper and the great team at EPW, as well as Senator Barrasso, and at the time, the majority staff, as well as Peter DeFazio and his team, and Congressman Graves and his team. The fact that a lot of the things that this group has been calling for years receive such bipartisan support is I think just a testament to the kind of the common sense with which you approach all your work. And like if WRDA is, implemented the way it's intended, the way that Congress meant, there is a meaningful shift in the Army Corps in the way that they put project planning and natural infrastructure on a more level playing field as a tool to address communities' flood protection and resilience needs. I mean, that's a big deal. Now we need to make sure we got to work together with the new leadership of the Army Corps to make sure that these provisions are implemented the way that Congress intended, and that we get kind of better results, more sustainable results as we address our flood protection and our coastal restoration needs. And this includes both the implementation of the principles, requirements, and guidelines, PRNG documents, as well as the implementation of more beneficial reuse projects. And I remember, one of my first trips to Washington as secretary, Tony and I went down, and we were making this case before Senator Carper's committee. I think Senator Vitter at the time from Louisiana was chairing the hearing. And this idea that these beneficial reuse projects were not just great ecologically, especially if the science is done well and they're kind of thought out well on the front end, but they also make a lot of sense. And I was in the group that very much struggled with seeing kind of good, clean sediment wind up in landfills because it was a lower cost alternative than putting into our marshes or our beaches where we really needed the material. I mean, finally, because of all of your work over the last several years and kind of getting better and better in every single WRDA, those trade-offs all of a sudden are more apparent, and we're actually winning the case more than we were a decade ago. That section 125, I think it was, in WRDA that actually talked about the beneficial use of dredged material, specifically. And it's just funny that when you open up the text and all of your words come out. But it's a big deal. It's a significant accomplishment that I think is going to set us up really, really well. Which brings me to my next kind of, I guess, plea and my moment of kind of advocacy for all of you. We are going to spend $3 to $4 trillion in the coming months on infrastructure. And as you've seen from some of the news articles, infrastructure is more and more broadly defined every day. And I think there's definitely a focus on resilience and how we make really smart investments in bolstering resilience in communities. I think there's greater awareness on both sides of the aisle that these types of investments really are that ounce of prevention that's worth a pound of cure, and that they are incredibly bipartisan investments, compared to maybe some other pieces of the overall package. We're making a case right now, as the National Wildlife Federation, a lot of the other NGOs, that at least 5% of the overall package should be spent on natural infrastructure. Now, if they're talking $3 or $4 trillion, that's 150 to $200 million, $200 billion. Sorry, DC numbers are always a little bigger. Upwards of $200 billion on natural infrastructure restoration. Now, what does that mean? Now, that's everything from coastal resilience and the big investments around ecosystems. We were really pleased to work with all of you as the great reforms around some of the FEMA allocations, making sure that more money is being spent on preventative, protective, mitigation measures. That's 6% we got for the kind of BRIC program. But this kind of thinking that big, large landscape scale investments, coastal resilience restoration projects, riparian projects, try to reduce inland flooding as well, should be a big part of that. Along with that, we're also advocating for things like massive investments in our national forests and our state and private and tribal forests that have been degraded to the point where a lot of the fires that we're seeing right now are being exacerbated by just really poor forest management over decades. You're going to see us pushing a lot for reclamation of degraded lands, whether that's abandoned mines or orphan wells. A lot of opportunities, a lot of jobs there, not so much in your districts, but in other parts of the country. Because I guess for some folks in the Gulf, we're going to be pushing on the wildlife side, of course, and trying to restore habitat in a collaborative, proactive way. And we're also going to be doing a lot on private lands. The reason I want to share that with you is I think there's a partnership opportunity, because I do think when we advocate together, we're able to accomplish great things. And this is a way to not just have great policy that we're seeing through different evolutions of WRDA and different authorizations, but really making sure that the money is available for the projects to get done at scale in a real way. And so, and it's everything, right? I mean, it's coastal resilience up and down the East Coast. It's the huge projects across the Gulf of Mexico. And obviously, there's some work we need to do in the West as well. There's inland projects all around the country that we need. And so, again, it's a huge opportunity for folks to come together. And ideally, my favorite style of advocacy is where you get folks from different regions that have different interests, but all kind of have a common objective, and that they come together and they kind of support each other. So, there's nothing better for me than when folks that are trying to get funding for the Colorado River support folks that are maybe trying to work in the Great Lakes or the Chesapeake or down in the Everglades. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to resilience, right? I mean, the needs are many, but the economics are fairly similar. You know, we know that when we invest in really smart, ecologically sound beach protection, that we can create, you know, tons of jobs and reduce, you know, property damage, you know, in the tens of billions of dollars of value. And, you know, and at the same time, we know that investments in, you know, better, healthier, you know, forests and, you know, more fire resilient communities also offer very similar economics. And so trying to think through how we pull together different coalitions in really smart ways to have the best kind of unified voice that, you know, resilience and kind of natural infrastructure investments should be front and center in the package creates a significant opportunity for both alignment, but also get some big things done. I mean, imagine instead of scraping over, you know, $1 billion here and there in the Army Corps budget, you know, trying to get the authorizations, trying to get them, you know, fully appropriated in the next cycle. Imagine, you know, having, you know, tens of billions of dollars of projects that we already have the projects, right? It's just a matter of getting the funding. Imagine having that level of capacity to prepare us for what lies ahead. I mean, it's pretty substantial and it's pretty exciting. And so, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, in all policies across the board that natural approaches are both eligible and competitive for different sources of funding. You know, we want to make sure that, you know, some version of Protect Resiliency grants are that we created in the Senate bill last year, you know, kind of gets reintroduced. But there's a lot of real opportunities that are really exciting that we see as a way to, you know, take a lot of the amazing work that you've all done, whether it be, you know, living shorelines or just really great, you know, coastal restoration projects or diversion projects or kind of rebuilding of some of the natural systems, getting them to scale, to scale in a big way, you know, all across communities across the country. I also wanted to really thank all of you. You know, then one of the priorities. Sorry, I got a little bit of a meltdown going on out here. Give me just 1 second. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. The wonderfulness of working from home still after a year. I think everyone's absolutely stir crazy. I did want to thank you all for the partnership on Blue Flag. We worked with all of you, and we had an arrangement where we kind of sub-licensed the right to run the Blue Flag Beaches program in partnership with ASBPA. And you know, we're the kind of U.S. Based operator for the Foundation for Environmental Education fee for their programs. We run their Eco Schools program. We got, you know, more than 12,000 schools across the country that are part of our Eco Schools program, and that we were able to, you know, provide some resources to ASBPA to help with this great program. And the idea of it's pretty simple, which is to, you know, recognize the great work that communities are doing to try to improve their beaches and their water quality. You know, I know we're in the process of formalizing the criteria and kind of standing up the initial pilot projects. COVID's obviously delayed some things, but you know, we'll be a partner in all this. And I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of your communities to receive the recognition that you so richly deserve for your amazing work. And, you know, we're really excited about ASBPA becoming a member of the Foundation for Environmental Education, becoming an affiliate member here in the US. And so you can take on kind of the administration of this program. We know it's enjoyed a lot of success and popularity abroad, and we think there's a huge opportunity here. And what better way to do it than in great partnership? And, you know, and we'll make sure that, you know, that the proposals and the work that's being done is fully recognized in ways as projects begin to be implemented in. And we're identifying and elevating the value of, you know, great, really healthy and accessible beaches. But again, I mean, I think it's just another great example of the years and years of partnership. So like the bottom line for me is that I couldn't say enough about the work that you've all done and being able to bring, you know, solutions from the local level up to the national level and vice versa. The fact that there's so much learning that goes on among all of you around best practice, about how you engage communities in smart ways, about how we think about all these different programs we have, whether it be through FEMA or through the Army Corps or local programs or state programs. You know, it's never been more important for us to be good at what we do than right now. You know, we're going to see more extreme weather events, right? We've seen some pretty rough ones the last few years, and in different places, we're seeing, you know, greater intensity, greater frequency, higher levels of precipitation. We're seeing, you know, the seasons extend in strange ways. We're also seeing, you know, challenges with, you know, sea level rise, both in real terms, but also some of the projections that are getting a little scarier. It's never been more important for us to be good at what we do. And frankly, the fact that all of you have come together over and over again to get good, you know, kind of good policy and making those great initiatives, not just, you know, kind of stay local, but really, you know, kind of acting nationally, is just a huge testament to each of you. And so I kind of want to end where I began, which is just an absolutely huge thank you for everything that you're doing, and try to enlist you in this big battle that we're kind of coming up to around infrastructure. I mean, I am absolutely confident that if we make the kind of investments that I think President Biden wants to make, investments that could be very bipartisan, if we can do this in smart ways, we can make communities infinitely safer than they are right now. We can reduce damage to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars if we do this the right way, creating millions of jobs in the process, creating all kinds of prosperity. It's going to make all of your work a little bit harder in the meantime, just given the sheer volume of work that I think is necessary, but it's needed. And I think that's an incredible opportunity. And I do think when we look back at this moment, coming out of COVID, coming out of huge unemployment still, I mean, we're still looking at double-digit millions of unemployed Americans, many of which are younger, many of which are individuals of color. Now is the time where we really need to figure out ways to put folks to work at scale. And what better way to do that than making communities more resilient, making our ecosystem stronger and healthier and more able to kind of survive what's coming. That's incredible work. And I think if we do this right, I mean, the number of families and the number of businesses that'll benefit for years to come really just can't be counted. And so I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for what you do. I want to encourage you all to lean in to the extent that you all can in your various roles. And one of the things I do love about ASBPA is that it does bring together kind of strange bedfellows in great ways, great partners that don't always work together as closely as they probably should, but under the common umbrella of trying to restore our having healthy coastlines. It really is a beautiful thing, and that type of partnership lends itself perfectly to the politics that we're living in right now, right? Where it's too often it's hard to bring people together. Over the last few years, we've seen conservation and kind of restoration investments bring people together across party lines in a way that hasn't existed in many other issue areas. How we use that to our advantage right now, I think, is really going to determine the landscape for years and years to come. And I'm just glad we're doing it arm in arm with all of you. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I apologize, I'm a little scattered today, but I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can turn it back. But again, thank you for what you're doing, and I think the best is truly yet to come.
Hey, Colin.
Tony Brad.
Yeah, well, I figured I'd raise my hand first and get a chance before while everybody else is gathering their questions. Great to see you, and thank you so much for joining us today. Great to hear the family behind you. It's always good to have the whole family standing behind you while you're doing your presentations, cheering you on. You alluded to a couple of things that I think are really worth us continuing to partner on, and maybe your thoughts on it. We're all curious as to where the administration is going to see the rubber meeting the road on these challenges we have. Coastal resiliency with the challenges of storms that you mentioned, and our improvement of resiliency. You and I work together, and I was reminded when you were talking about going down and talking to EPW, and we have even greater chances now with the chair being Mr. Carper and John Kane. Fabulous work with John Kane going on, and I've enjoyed working with Jessie over the years. You're right, she's a superstar. She's really great. When we talked about the investment dollar, $1 versus $1 investment in mitigation equals about $7 in savings later on, which doesn't get the kind of attention that it needs to get because it's no news after the event. Prior to you today, we had an address from Major General Graham, which was very enlightening. They do want to see some things done differently. Joe Vitri was in on that discussion from the Center of Excellence on Coastal. All the players are aligning, and they're switching their attention, particularly because of, I think, still from Sandy and other events we've had, Back Bay flooding and communities at risk, and how we can make those investments within those communities. To me, there's a natural, and I want you to talk about this a little bit because I know you and I put a lot of thought together on it. There's a natural alignment as we talk about infrastructure maintenance that waterway usage will become another viable part of the three-legged triangle of surface transportation: roads, rail, and waterways. We see that there's a higher investment, about $2 billion extra coming out of the funding for ports and rivers through the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund this year. So that produces sediment. And so marrying those business lines within the Corps becomes very challenging when you take flood risk management achievements out of a navigation business lines. I know you have some connection with the administration. What's your thinking on how we can try to modernize the approach and look across business lines and give credit where we're seeing multiple benefits that come out of the investment and stop the stovepiping that's been going on?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I still remember Senator Carper joking about your words coming out of my mouth at one of those hearings. I mean, we've been making this point for a long time. I think, and we actually had a breakthrough this spring, and it was very, or this winter, it was very, very low key. But we've been working with with Speaker Pelosi for the last couple of years, and Senator Schumer, and other Republicans as well. But trying to make the case that investments that have such a high return on investment need to be budgeted differently, and that right now, we score, using kind of DC language, we score the $1 that we spend on coastal protection. We don't score the $6 or $7 or $10 of avoided cost. And so what happens is, we end up underinvesting in the preventative measure and then paying through the nose when there's an actual disaster. We saw this after Sandy. We saw this after, I can go down the list of all the hurricanes the last 10 years. And the speaker, and to her credit, herself and also her staff, really got the balance of prevention, right? This idea that those kind of investments. I think the Biden team gets it as well. I mean, I kind of made this point throughout the campaign. Senator Carper gets it. He wants to make sure that dollar is paid for, but he also wants to account for the savings. And I agree, John Kane has been an absolute rock star as well. And so, I mean, I think the stars are aligned. I just think we all have to lead with that. This is going to save money. It's not going to cost money. And I think the more unified and look, and the challenge with folks like all of us, right, is we lead with the ecological value, the protection value. We talk about all the additional benefits. Where in a budget context, it's really just about dollars and cents. But I mean, imagine an environment where I don't even need the full $6 savings. Just say it's budget neutral. Say that investments in this area, at least just I don't need 6 for 1. I just need 1 for 1 to make the economics work. I just feel like there are so many good projects that are being held up right now because of that $1 scoring that we can move. Now, on the bigger point about kind of working across business lines, I mean, I think we still have more work to do there. I mean, I do think that the language we got into WRDA together last year, makes the case for looking at the ecological and economic value of not treating, there's nothing more, I'm on the Delaware, on the Atlantic right now. I mean, I'm actually about a couple miles from Utah, staying at a buddy's house, but there's nothing worse than having, good, clean sediment go to Kilcohook in a waste disposal facility when we know we need it for our beaches, for our wetlands, as we're trying to build up systems. I mean, I'll give Tony a lot of credit. I mean, some of the early pioneering kind of deposition projects that were done in Delaware trying to build up wetlands were kind of his brainchild, and kind of thinking through, again, how in our inland bays environment, how we use that sediment in a smart way. And that was more kind of in a state context. But I mean, I think we got to make the case saying I feel like no sediment left behind, right? No clean, we can't afford to have clean sediment that we need for so many purposes being treated as a waste anymore. I think more and more folks get it. I think it's bipartisan, but we're at a time when we're going to see a lot of erosion. We're going to see a lot of loss of sediment in different ways, in ways that are not linear, and that we just can't afford to lose a single grain that's clean that could be put to a higher and better use. And so I think that's something we can work on together. But it's common sense. If you can get folks to think about it for 30 seconds, it just doesn't fit as neatly into a hashtag or a tweet as some of the other things that are being advocated. But those are the little things that if we could unlock millions of cubic feet of good, clean sediment for projects all across the country with just that one change of thinking of it as an asset and not a waste.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We've got some real advocacy. I know Mary Landro from Louisiana has been championing some of these causes for a while. Garrett, of course, Garrett Graves gets it. So we have the commonality, I think, all across the country to get this done. I look forward to a deeper partnership. Of course, our executive director, Derek, has gone to Coastal States Organization, and we're in search of a replacement for Derek and want to get our feet underneath us with that. But I look at real opportunities between CSO, ASBPA, and some of the other NGOs of really digging in together and having a really strong alliance over these issues over the coming years, and having receptive ears from both House, Senate, and the administration. So really looking forward to a deeper commitment and working more closely with you on that. I'll reach out to Jesse and we'll further this conversation a little bit. Time for others.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box, but I'll just say that I know many of our members with ASBPA, especially on the dredging side, certainly appreciate your advocacy for beneficial use. I mean, and here in Louisiana, that's something that we really have been trying to do a lot more of, especially in the recent years. I think that, as you had mentioned, that there's a lot of natural infrastructure, and I had the opportunity to help write part of the infrastructure report card through ASCE for the state of Louisiana 4 years ago, and one of the things that they actually had kind of contemplated was, should they make coastal wetlands be a part of that infrastructure report card? I mean, personally, I think that they should. It was decided not to because it's not really hard engineering or hard construction, but it goes without saying that, coastal marshes and some of these buffer zones, especially in a place like Louisiana that's hit as hard as it and as often as it is by hurricanes, especially this past year, that kind of resiliency on the coast translates to an incredible savings on recovery and on the backside of things. And so, just thank you for your advocacy on that avenue.
Yeah, and Jack, I mean, and I think one thing, I mean, you guys are the gold standard in a lot of ways, right? I mean, I think the work and the master plan in Louisiana is kind of the biggest thing we're missing is just funding. And so, I mean, I was talking yesterday with Senator Landrieu about, the RISE Act, trying to figure out ways to have more revenues coming to the states, that are coming from different kinds of production. I think there's ways to make sure that the offshore wind, revenues also go towards restoration. There's a kind of an interesting compromise bipartisan that's coming out hopefully soon. And I'm trying to put together some of these revenues and investing in coastal resilience, as well as, state level resources directly for master plans like yours. And frankly, it is nice to have something that's just completely bipartisan. I mean, I remember one of my first times Tony and I went down to DC together. I mean, Garrett was still running the Coastal Commission at the time. I was running the state agency in Delaware, and the two of us were testifying together, complaining about, how simple changes could make a huge difference for, the way the Corps and the states work together. Now we have, at Interior and BOEM and other agencies also, that are part of this conversation. And so I think the time is right. And so Jack, anything I can do to be helpful, let us know. Because I do think the more that like the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic and kind of southern states are working with the Gulf, working with different regions kind of across very similar challenges in a lot of cases, because a lot of it comes back to the way that we account for things, the way we score things, the way we fund things, the better off we're all going to be, because God knows we need the work.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So we do have one question here from Alejandra Enriquez. What has your experience been with reaching out to communities and leaders of communities of underrepresented backgrounds about their advocacy for beach preservation / sediment issues?
Yeah, Alejandro, I appreciate the question. I don't think we've done enough. I think that there's some states and some communities we do a better job, particularly with historical Black communities and other communities. I still think we under resource a lot of communities that may not meet the cost benefit test in the way that the Army Corps or states kind of look at different things, but have a historical heritage with the land, or some kind of connection. I think the one place where I have seen the advocacy really be more intersectional and more inclusive has been around some of the offshore oil drilling kind of conversations. And again, I don't want to get political in this conversation, but I think the energy there around concerns about potential impacts, particularly on the Atlantic coast, were shared across a lot of different types of a lot of communities with a lot of different backgrounds. And so I think as a community, we have to become much more inclusive in the way that we help design projects and bring people together, because there's a power in having more folks involved in the advocacy, as your question alluded. So I think we've made some progress in some areas. I think some states have probably done a little more than others. I think at the federal level as a whole, we probably have some work to do. But look, I mean, I think the more folks are exposed to why these types of projects are important, why healthy natural resources reduce potential damage, and can save lives, and also have all these other ecological benefits, the more the merrier. And so I think it's the kind of work that all of us should be doubling down on in the years ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to kind of echo what you said, to give everybody some stake in things or some sense of ownership over it helps to convey the value of these projects so much better, and it helps get people behind it. And like you said, if it becomes political, it's just that much harder to go through. So having it be bipartisan is always going to be much easier. And at least I'll say for the state of Louisiana, it seems like that's the one area where our politics aren't on some sort of divide. So hopefully that translates to the national scene as well.
No, exactly. And then look, and I think the earlier we engage folks, the better input we get, and we learn all kinds of good things. So, it's like, I just think that all communities aren't the same. We got to take the time to listen and learn.
All right. Well, we're right up on time. So thank you so much for your time and being a part of the Coastal Summit, and taking some questions and having a lot of really good conversations here, I feel like. All right. Well, thank you. Our next presenter is Mark Osler. Mark Osler is the Senior Advisor for Coastal Inundation and Resilience for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. His leadership advances coastal inundation science and the ability of decision makers to prepare and respond to changes affecting the nation's coastlines. And I think a perfect follow-up to what we had with Colin just now. And again, like I said, from Louisiana, your work is very important to our communities and our coastlines, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And so with that, welcome.
Thanks, Jack. Are you hearing me all right?
Loud and clear.
Terrific. And what a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation to spend a bit of time in community together. I have the privilege to serve NOAA as Senior Advisor for Coastal Inundation and Resilience, as Jack noted, and I'm really happy to be in the presence of so many familiar faces and names here on the invite list. I have a long history of connection with ASBPA. It's going back about a decade now, stemming from my time in private industry. And that connection has continued here into the role that I serve NOAA in. I helped y'all convene a panel to learn a bit more about NOAA and coastal resilience at this event 2 years ago. Hosted an advocacy visit for some of y'all's members last year, and we'll be doing so again on Thursday morning. And so I wanted to give a shout out to Lynette and Margarita, who are helping organize that visit in just another day or two here. Next slide, please. So there's basically three things I want to cover. I want to give you something that you're probably hearing, but every different perspective you can hear on this administration priorities, I think will help provide a fuller picture of how things are happening right now in DC. I want to talk a bit about coastal resilience at NOAA. Not really an overview like we did at that panel 2 years ago, but more about what's happening right now at NOAA. What is my day-to-day looking at over the next 12 weeks and 12 months here on the subject of coastal resilience. And then lastly, I want to help us pivot and looking a bit forward of what might be coming next based on the first two. Next slide, please. And again, thanks. So as you are all aware, there have been a flurry of executive orders that speak to this administration's priorities. They include fighting back against the COVID pandemic. They are focused on economic recovery and protection of the environment. As you can imagine, it has been a real busy time going through a transition in our nation's government, and NOAA is well poised to be a leader in many of the administration's emerging priorities, particularly those around combating climate change. Recent climate-related executive orders have called on federal agencies to review and rescind all actions taken in the last 4 years which are inconsistent with protecting the environment, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, bolstering resilience to the impacts of climate change, restoring and expanding national monuments, prioritizing environmental justice, and more. So I wanted to note a couple of these particularly. So the executive order on protecting public health and the environment and restoring science and tackling the climate crisis. This one was signed within hours of inauguration. It ordered a whole review of actions taken, as I just mentioned, and for the agencies to determine if there are certain actions that should be suspended, revised, or rescinded. Of particular interest, perhaps to this group, is that in this executive order, there was language that essentially reinstated the federal flood risk management standard, which requires that federally funded infrastructure be built with a higher margin of safety against extreme floods and sea level rise. ASBPA hosted a discussion on the federal flood risk management standard when it was released in 2017, I believe, and so this is back on the table. Executive Order Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad calls for government-wide approach to tackling the climate crisis. NOAA's currently reviewing this executive order in detail and to ensure an alignment with our work. But honestly, there may not be much adjustment to be made. NOAA has largely been on the right track and in the space of climate concerns and the science related to it. Although in most respects, there's definitely more that we could do. Of particular note in this is a directive on conserving our nation's land and waters. This is in section 216. That includes the important goal of conserving at least 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. So you may hear this initiative referred to as 30 by 30, 30% of our lands by the year 2030. NOAA is a leading agency charged with protection of our nation's ocean and Great Lakes waters, and NOAA expects to play a significant role in advancing this effort and in developing a national strategy on marine protected areas, particularly. And the third one I wanted to note is the Executive Order on Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities. In addition to the climate change EOs, NOAA is actively ensuring that we are in compliance with this Executive Order on Racial Equity, which mandates that all federal agencies pursue a comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all, including those who've been historically underserved. Under this executive order, agencies must conduct an equity assessment, review their programs and policies to determine whether underserved communities face systematic barriers to accessing benefits and services. One of my notes I want to share with this group and with all coastal communities, when we talk about equitable outcomes at the coast, there are two ideas that I think, at least two, that are critical that I wanted to kind of repeat with this group here. One is that when we think about policy decisions, whether they be at the state, local, or at the federal level, if we are looking at policy actions that have the goal of improving coastal resilience, those discussions must necessarily be informed by the people who will most closely be impacted by the policies that we are discussing. And so there's a very real challenge to make sure that we got the right folks at the table when you're talking about trying to help those folks with whatever challenges they're facing on the coast. So one, make sure we got the right people at the table. Secondarily, is that equitable outcomes rely upon equitable access. And in the case of coastal resilience, that means specifically access to environmental data and help in understanding how those data relate to local challenges. And so with regards to NOAA data and services on the coast, I absolutely understand there are critical gaps remaining in geographic coverage that NOAA is working hard to address. Those gaps are particularly apparent when looking at our rural coastlines and particularly within Alaska and the US territories. And a last note on this new administration, not through an executive order, but something that's just emerged in the last few weeks, but the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy has recently added Jane Lubchenco in a newly created position of Deputy Director for Climate and Environment at OSTP. And Dr. Lubchenco was the NOAA administrator for 4 years from 2009 to 2013 and has a really unique understanding on the role that coasts and our oceans play within this wider climate discussion. And so all of these actions should be encouraging to our coastal communities and give us hope that both NOAA and the federal government writ large are well positioned to serve into these executive mandates. Next slide, please. So what's going on at NOAA today? So NOAA's leadership and reputation as a science agency and one with strong relationships and partnerships with coastal and ocean management community positions the agency to be a leading contributor to this administration's agenda on climate change, racial equity, economic recovery, and scientific integrity. NOAA's mission is one of science, service, and stewardship. And combined with NOAA's mandates and expertise, research and capabilities, have made NOAA a leader in predicting and communicating risk to life, property, economies, and ecosystems from water-related hazards, including sea level rise and coastal flooding. Next slide. And so one of the ways that we're talking about this currently is in relation to the 4 Ps NOAA helps predict how our actions today are going to affect tomorrow. We help prepare our communities to meet the challenges based on the knowledge held in these predictions. We protect communities and ecosystems, and we preserve the natural environment, the fisheries, and the natural trust resources, which NOAA is mandated to preserve. Next slide. So we do this across a spectrum of services. They're shown here in an interlinking way to indicate that these are all happening at various scales and at various moments. But starting at the top and working our way clockwise, NOAA provides some of the foundational Earth system observations that feed into analysis and modeling of our Earth system processes. So this is precipitation, it's hurricanes, it's sea level rise, it's ecosystem change, it's fisheries, it's all of those things and more. We also are mandated to work through communication and mapping of this information and into decision support. And NOAA is unique in this, in that our mission and authority and expertise are explicit in both requiring NOAA to produce the science, to make it publicly available, but also to take the step of pivoting that information and communicating it to decision makers on the ground. And so what is really central to NOAA's mission here, and it comes into our coastal work every day, is ensuring that what starts as data or information has a chance to be converted into knowledge. And that requires a jump from the federal agency and from the scientists into the local decision makers and communities themselves. And that knowledge from that jump from information to knowledge is what can help inform decision making on the ground. NOAA is really unique in that we have mission and expertise in standing in that pivot role and making sure that that transition from information to knowledge actually happens successfully on the ground. Next slide, please. And of course, this group knows as well as any that the increases in coastal flooding and related coastal hazards represent a threat to national and economic security. Our societal response to these challenges requires the data, the modeling, the mapping, and services that quantify and communicate the drivers of coastal risk, including sea level rise, and to improve understanding of both present day and future risk at the coast. All of this with the goal of enabling sound public policy and risk-informed decision-making. And so currently at NOAA, Congress has shown great support and has been an engaged partner for supporting NOAA's organization around coastal resilience. Part of the reason I have the job that I do is that there is no one department, there's no coastal resilience department at NOAA. There are just myriad contributors from across the agency. Some where coastal resilience is the center of what they do every day, and they tackle many aspects, and other parts of NOAA where they have an important but unique sliver of the puzzle to contribute. And so one of the things that happened with the omnibus budget that was passed at the end of December was new money to NOAA related to organizing our work on coastal inundation, resilience, and flooding overall. And so this included direction to NOAA to, quote, initiate and accelerate, end quote, efforts to integrate coastal observations, coastal modeling, and service delivery. So again, that whole spectrum from the beginning of the data into the pivot to knowledge related to coastal resilience. Along with that, Congress has directed NOAA to author 2 reports, which are due to Congress in this June of this year. Those reports are as follows. The first report will highlight the need to expand NOAA's observations, modeling, and service delivery, as I just noted. So kind of sketch a picture of what would it look like for NOAA to have a more fully integrated coastal resilience approach for our data and information and service delivery. So that's one report. The second report is to give voice to a 5-year research and development plan related specifically to coastal inundation and service delivery. And so the 2 reports are asked for separately, but they'll be written concurrently. I am pleased to be leading the NOAA-wide effort to author both of these reports, and they will start with foundational data and physical processes focused on coastal inundation and high tide flooding, as well as expanding to other environmental change at the coast to include ecological forecasting and ecosystem change. And so We are looking forward, I think, to the role that those reports can play in terms of clarifying where NOAA's services could best be advanced in the future. Next slide, please. One thing that is clear and that I think bears repeating as often as it can be repeated is that no single organization can meet the needs of the nation on these questions. I am proud of NOAA's leadership role. I am also greatly aware that NOAA's work alone is not enough to change the tide. And so both of these reports to Congress will explicitly give voice to NOAA's enduring commitment to the value of partnerships and the role that they play in enhancing coastal resilience. Those partnerships relate to our connection to other federal agencies shown here, but also to state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, NGOs like y'all's self, to academia, and to the private sector. Next slide. And so what's on the horizon? If that's what we're working on today, what might we be working on in the near future? Next click, please. One thing, from all those EOs and all this, there's a lot of discussion that everyone is doing climate, right? We are, as a federal government, going to do climate change now. And the following is not an exact transcript, but I have been in many discussions that sound a lot like this. Hey, bro, you doing climate now? Yeah. How could you even ask that, right? The question is whether you're doing climate. And everyone's nodding at themselves that yes, we are doing climate. So we've seen an editorial from the Washington Post that said every cabinet job is about climate change now. We heard the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, said, quote, the administration is committed to using the full power of the US federal government to address climate change as part of the Build Back Better plan, end quote. And so what's on the horizon in my mind is what will this actually look like? And so we will absolutely see a continued focus on CO2 and greenhouse gas mitigation, all towards an effort to decarbonize our national energy diet. This will have direct impact in terms of investment in offshore wind market, which we are expected to see mature. Our colleagues at BOEM, who are following me on this agenda, will be very busy, both with environmental review. As we know, we are expecting the findings on the Vineyard Wind project to be announced soon. But also in considerations about new leasing and other considerations that BOEM has a leadership role in. And so there will be continued focus on greenhouse gas mitigation, which is right and proper. There will be a less publicized but already emerging focus on increasing our ability to adapt and understand how change in our environment will impact wider issues related to our built environment, but also expanding into real estate and finance and all sectors of our economy. That has probably been less headline-worthy material. It's been mostly the greenhouse gas mitigation, but there are serious discussions going on about impacts and adaptation. And so just to give you a real live look into my calendar this week and next week, there are absolutely increased tempo of discussion with longtime colleagues on these topics. On the science production side, there are discussions ongoing with close partners like the USGS, NASA, and National Science Foundation on how we can better partner to produce information that's needed at the coast. I will also say there are continued efforts with close partners like the Army Corps of Engineers, DoD, and FEMA in terms of partnership on science and making sure that NOAA's information is helping to serve their mission delivery needs. And then the discussions that are always happening in the background but are increasing in their cadence lately are discussions with State Department, the National Security Council, and various congressional committees and members of Congress. And so within that normal diet of coordination and dialogue on adaptation to change, there are also newer connections that are emerging. For instance, there have been direct overtures into NOAA from the Department of Treasury, from the Federal Housing and Finance Agency, who are the regulatory parents of Fannie and Freddie with respect to homeowner loans in the real estate industry. And then also increase from the General Services Administration, who are the nation's federal landlord and managers of real property. And so what questions are these folks asking? They will be very familiar to this group. They are asking, how do I quantify risk from natural hazards today? How will these hazards change in the future? And how will this change itself if we anticipate that our society as a whole will not adapt perfectly to this change? How will that change itself and the residual risk create new hazards, both to mission and to the economic and financial situation across the nation? And so that leads into next slide, please. So those questions get at a distinction that we talk a lot about within NOAA, but not one that I had before I joined NOAA, but it is the distinction between service delivery and decision support. And here's how I explain this. Service delivery is an entity, particularly in this case, who's producing science or environmental intelligence. Service delivery is saying, here's what we have. It is handing over the information that you have as best as you can explain it. Decision support is handing over something that is not, here's what I have, but here's what you need. And that gets into a conscious effort to commit to listening to user needs and producing science and analysis that can directly answer those needs. And so what I take away from this increased diet from those who are increasingly interested in saying that they're doing climate and trying to figure out what does that mean to them, what it means to them is that they are sharpening their own awareness of what they need for decision support. And in science producing agencies like NOAA, there is I think, an important moment for us to have fora within which we can listen to the needs for decision support and ensure that we're adjusting the work that we are doing to meet those needs. Next slide. And so I want to reiterate again that a whole of government approach is needed as we will increasingly hear clear statements of need for decision support and not just service delivery. We're going to need all of government to understand and come together to combat the crisis on the coast. Many federal agencies have key contributions to make within the delivery of data, the production of the science, as well as the work to serve this information to the public. I spend a significant portion of my time in this interagency coordination forum through bilateral discussions with other agencies, as well as through established coordination groups like the U.S. Global Change Research Program and a newly formed set of alphabet soup, the Interagency Council on Advancing Meteorological Services, or ICAMS, is kind of the first federal forum whose mission is to talk specifically about service delivery and decision support beyond just questions of coordination on research and development. Next slide. And so this is my closing note here, is that all of this in my mind has an important intersection with private industry. Industry and the communities and beach managers and states and clients that they are serving have been faced with this dichotomy for a long time. This difference between what do I need answered and what is available to me already. And private industry stands in that space by definition to bridge that gap between information and knowledge. And so I want to invite those that work in the industry space to continue to think of yourselves not only as users of the information from NOAA and others, but also a really important voice about giving rise to clarity on what is needed in terms of decision support. You guys see the scopes of work that you're being asked to do, and there could be more that the federal government and NOAA specifically is doing to serve into that. Two distinctions that I hold in mind when I think about this dynamic is there are important roles to distinguish between information that is for the public good versus the private good. And so that suggests a role that if we can get distinct between what information is a public good, meaning could be generally available to all and be beneficial to a wide swath of society, those are likely places where the federal government can and should be doing more, versus a private good could be site-specific, industry-specific, location-specific, in a way that private industry might be best served. I will also note that there are questions of scale from national to local. And I think when we think about national scale authoritative information, it's right to think of it of the federal government seeking to provide that information. And when we get down into parcel level, detailed local information, that's probably at a scale that is not sustainable for the federal government to provide information. And so there's some membrane in there in geographic scale where it might be nice to have a cleaner handshake between federal government and private industry. And so that's something that I would invite this group to reflect on as you continue your discussions this week. And so last slide, please. To conclude, NOAA's mission of science, service, and stewardship, combined with our mandates, expertise, and research capabilities, have made NOAA a leader in predicting and communicating risk to life, property, economies, and ecosystems from water-related hazards, including sea level rise and coastal flooding. NOAA's success with these endeavors as a science agency relies uniquely on the relationships and partnerships we have with coastal and ocean management communities, of which ASBPA is a part. I'm grateful for the opportunity to spend this time with you and look forward to an additional discussion with a smaller group on Thursday morning. It looks like we might have 4 minutes left, so I'd be happy to spend that time fielding a question or two or any discussion you might want to touch on.
Sure. We have one question in the Q&A box here. It's, from an anonymous attendee. It says, how does NOAA anticipate reconciling preservation of land and EFH concerns regarding no open water fill?
Yeah, and so I appreciate the question. What this gets at is the connection between the sort of state of the science and the regulatory requirements that exist on the coast. And so we do these things in dialogue. That is the basic answer, but it is the only answer in that there is a requirement, I think often for NOAA is expected to bring the authoritative science on what is the state of play within the environment today and how is it likely to change given no intervention or given some intervention. That information needs to be married with regulatory requirements and how they are interpreted. And it needs to be in the third part of the stool then is the local impacts and the outcomes that are trying to be achieved on the ground by the action that's being proposed. And so NOAA has an important piece in kind of bringing that important environmental data, but is not by itself the whole voice on a lot of these regulatory questions.
All right, we have one more question just popped up. How will NOAA work with their Office for Coastal Management and the federally approved coastal management programs to support the state needs? Or state needs?
Yeah, so NOAA through the Office for Coastal Management, it administers the Coastal Zone Management Act, where NOAA has authorization and mandate to be in partnership with states to help states understand sound coastal management, something that ASBPA has been at the center of, and I heard CSO mentioned as well, and have important voice in that. And so the question, answers itself. That is OCM's job, is to do just that. I think in large part, the states are under-resourced at this point to understand, well, not to understand, but to kind of holistically manage and start working on adaptation projects. And so one of the things we are doing is to look at sources of grant funding across the federal family. We said Fish and Wildlife here before me, and others are working on this. And NOAA administers a Coastal Resilience Grant Program in partnership with the National Fish and Wildlife Federation. And that over the past 5 years have put out more than $200 million towards coastal grants that go to states. We are also working closely with FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, the BRIC program, which is one of the newer and larger grant programs that FEMA is administering. And so we work a lot, and OCM, the Office for Coastal Management that the question was about, is spearheading that effort for NOAA, that partnership with FEMA. They also administer directly the grants we have with NIFWF. And so in terms of both science, convening discussions to find like-minded communities to be in dialogue together, as well as pushing out external grant monies, OCM is at the center of all of those activities for NOAA.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any new questions here, but we're right up on our time anyway. But Mark, thank you very much for your time being here with the Coastal Summit, and we appreciate your insight.
Yeah, cheers, everyone. Have a great session. I look forward to being with some of you on Thursday morning.
All right. Thank you. All right. Next up, we have Dr. Megan Carr. She'll be presenting Currents of Change, how BOEM adapts to partner needs. She is the Chief Strategic Resources Program Manager, or Chief of Strategic Programs, Resources Program, sorry, for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. As chief, she oversees the development and implementation of the National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program, the assessment and inventory of oil and gas and other mineral resources, maintenance of official maps and geographic data, economic evaluations to ensure the receipt of fair market value for offshore resources, and the identification and mitigation of financial risks associated with leasing activities. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Carr.
Hello, everyone. And I just want to thank the invitation to come and speak. Had the pleasure of meeting some of you yesterday at the BOEM kind of meet and greet session where we gave a high level overview of the things we'll get into a little bit more detail today. So don't worry if you weren't a part of that session, you get all the details anyways. And just as a precursor, I want to give a big shout out to the musicians that are outside my apartment window downtown DC with the extra sun. We are being blessed with more and more of their talents. And so depending on how your speakers are, you may get a little bit of a pleasure during this briefing right now. But essentially, I do want to say that the wading into new waters topic is pretty apt considering everything that we've gone through this last year with the pandemic. And as you know, being effective managers, the effects of climate change that we're all getting into now as we're doing climate, as was said earlier, the rising seas, everything's moving so much more rapidly than it has in the past. And so being able to adapt is really a key focus. And I'm preaching to the choir here, I know that, but I would be remiss if I didn't point that out with every conversation that I have with people. For today's talk, I am focusing on what BOEM is doing now, but if there is time at the end, I would like to open the dialogue. I'm really interested in seeing how we can partner better, what type of ideas people have for any future collaborations. My email address and phone number potentially will be at the end of the slides. Please feel free to contact me if you don't get to get your ideas out here in the open. We are always looking for ways that we can more effectively manage the resources that we have. And that includes the tax dollar resources that is paying for all of the work that we do here at the federal government. So next slide. So as many of you know, BOEM has 4 core responsibilities to the public of our management of the development of the Outer Continental Shelf. Those are the Office of Environmental Programs, Oil and Gas, the Renewable Energy Program, which is up and coming pretty quickly now with the new administrative priorities, and Marine Minerals. As Chief of BOEM's Office of Strategic Resources, I oversee national policy for 2 of those. That's the Oil and Gas Program and Marine Minerals, which arguably has the most direct impact on your communities and those that you serve here. Others in my portfolio include the Geospatial Services, Resource Evaluation, Economics, and Risk Management. So next slide. For those of you that may not know, the Marine Minerals Division manages access to non-energy minerals in the Outer Continental Shelf, most often used to replenish beaches, fortify barrier islands and shorelines, and restore wetland areas. In addition, we manage access to hard and critical minerals, including the rare earth minerals and elements. The ones that are on the OCS, of course, our partners with BLM are managing that onshore component. And that's an area that's gaining increased attention due to the nation's reliance on these minerals for technological advances that we depend on today. So we are partnering with the Department of Defense on a lot of those different initiatives and Department of Energy as well, as we get a few more responsibilities handed down from the White House. It seems over the next several years will be a major activity point. And the primary focus of the Marine Minerals Division centers on sand and gravel resources, which is what I'm here to primarily talk about today. And that helps to provide the help that you need to tackle projects to preserve and restore your coastlines and enhance their resiliency to manage the next storm, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how strong they're going to be, and then how quickly the next one comes, as we saw this last hurricane season. And those projects tend to lend to the financial health and physical safety of your communities, as some people have already touched on today. So next slide. So it is no coincidence that over the past 10 years, BOEM has provided resources for 8 projects already recognized by ASBPA as the best restored beaches. And those are listed here on the slide, some with a few photos that we think capture a lot of the beauty of what we're trying to preserve, and a few little action shots like you see in the Duval County shot there with the bulldozer, which is always, I guess, fun for some people to watch. If you have kids, it's a source of entertainment for them. But one of the things these projects have in common is that by working cooperatively, these communities are able to overcome the significant challenges to meet their goals. And on a personal note, as someone that grew up along the Gulf of Mexico, has extended family all up and down California's coast, I've lived in Alaska for about a decade prior to moving to DC, so now more in line with the Atlantic coast. So I really appreciate more and more throughout my years of all the efforts and those collaborations to keep things as pristine as possible. So I want to thank everyone from the bottom of my heart, because I enjoy the beaches. That's where I vacation. There's nothing else that I want to do than just lay on the beach and read my book. So thank you. You provide me that opportunity to have a little happiness in my life. All right, next slide. So as we know, the outer continental shelf resources are not always easy to find and to reach. That's a bit of an understatement. And those challenges include the character of the materials being harvested, ensuring the materials match where they will be deposited. The location and the expense of the individual projects is another challenge that is constantly being discussed. Conflicts, particularly when there are multiple uses to a project site. I think that's one that we can all agree is probably the largest of the challenges. The time that's involved in simply carrying out the objectives of the project is a challenge. And of course, we have to mention the coordination piece, which stakeholder engagement is paramount to address things early on in the project life cycle. And so I encourage as many voices and as loud of voices as possible, really engage in those communities, particularly when we have open forums and scoping sessions. That's a very valuable place that you can interject yourself into the process. All right, next slide. But despite these challenges, BOEM is moving forward on 4 different fronts to improve our effectiveness in working with you. Those are here on this slide. Main one, making upgrades and additions to our marine minerals information system. And that allows everyone benefit to the existing research and data that's going on across the country. Number 2, surveying and locating sand at the reconnaissance level with an eye toward project design. We're also trying our best at streamlining. I know that's a buzzword right now, but we are trying to streamline lots of different processes to improve those efficiencies, particularly in terms of our non-negotiated or our negotiated agreements, where in cases of emergency, we need to have a rapid response to a storm event. How can we make that process better to provide the resources that are needed, kind of get over those administrative hurdles? And so any opportunities or ideas that you have for that, please pass those along and we can incorporate them into our conversations. And then of course, the proactive environmental research, a lot of that we do supplements and assist in the environmental work that the people that are proponents of the different project ideas, what they're required for. Hopefully we're helping them out as well. All right, next slide. So with this, just an overview, our kind of a crowning achievement over the last couple of years, the Marine Minerals Information System. And this is an online dashboard and interactive tool that provides public access resource data from more than 40 local, state, and federal governments, as well as academia and other entities. And this database contains approximately 25 data layers describing sediment location and quantity offshore 18 different states. And the MMIS database, it's not only utilized to discover and share data in regional or site-specific searches, but it also helps in that decision-making. And it is absolutely your entryway into the enormous quantities of data that we're collecting in the National Offshore Sand Inventory. Next slide. This year, we've added a feedback function, and that's a menu to help users find what they're looking for, solicit ideas for making the dashboard better. And the link for this system is located at the bottom left of the slide. I encourage you to explore it, make whatever feedback you would like. Particularly of interest to us is, how is the system serving your needs? What are the different things that you like about it? What's the functionality that we definitely need to make sure that we keep moving forward, as well as what needs to be enhanced? And then if there's any other just general ideas for improvement, we're always looking for that. So all of your ideas are extremely valuable in that. We're also improving interoperability with state systems. A good example of this is offshore Louisiana. And in order to pull together a more complete picture of the resources of the Gulf of Mexico, BOEM funded, and we now have access to the Louisiana Sand Sediment Resource Database. And this trove of information about the Gulf is now available on MMIS due to our work with the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. And in arrangements like this, each state maintains its flexibility to use and maintain their own data access systems, but then everyone benefits because it's being hosted on the MMIS platform. So it's a nice in-between, I consider it a nice nexus for a lot of sources of really valuable information. So next slide. So surveying and locating sand at the reconnaissance level with an eye toward project design is a goal we're constantly striving for with our field efforts. And to further create a more unified look to the sand inventory, BOEM and the Corps of Engineers are working together to conduct a sand gap analysis for the South Atlantic. And this is focusing on the area from the Virginia, North Carolina border southward and wrapping all around Florida. In doing so, we've discovered a number of data gaps, and we're trying to fill those gaps from geological and geophysical surveys that already exist and we're able to identify, as well as design our surveys for the future to make sure that we're really targeting the areas that are of most importance and have the highest need. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, on our West Coast, the BOEM's Pacific Regional Team is providing a useful example of a multi-agency partnership. And with that, BOEM and our partners are assessing and inventorying sand and gravel resources in federal and state waters for the potential use to address critical erosion hotspots. And these hotspots are defined and managed by county and local government agencies. And this is in coordination with the California Coastal Sediment Work Group. And this particular work group is a collaborative task force of state, federal, and local agencies chaired by the Corps of Engineers and the California Natural Resources Agency. As part of this effort, the USGS is reviewing and synthesizing existing geological data and conducting surveys and sampling to map sand and gravel resources offshore California. These study areas could provide valuable sand resources to nearby beach erosion concern areas as identified by the working group, Beach Erosion Assessment Survey, and the California Regional Sediment Management Plans. So as was mentioned in the previous talk, and I think touched on a little bit more in the ones before that, the collaborative nature of these projects is what makes them successful. And the more perspectives we can get into it, the better everything becomes, whether it's a deliverable or just open up lines of communication. So next slide. One project over the past year was both a streamlining success and an example of how proactive environmental research can save time and money as a project gets underway. And this is the Shoalmate. This is a geospatial tool used to better assess offshore dredging impacts to essential fish habitat and to facilitate production of a written assessment. Shoalmate, by the way, stands for Shoal Map Assessment Tool for Essential Fish Habitats. So a bit of a mouthful. But over the course of a 2-year BOEM-funded study, the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science at NOAA and Quantum Spatial, a geospatial services company, they developed fish distribution models, compiled dredging history, summarized environmental data, and all of which goes into this tool. The tool internal to BOEM covers federal waters out to 50 meters in depth in the Gulf of Mexico and the US Atlantic Outer Continental Shelf. But Shoalmate does more than assess risk to habitat. It also generates a written report containing necessary elements needed to streamline essential fish habitat consultations with NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service by identifying and addressing impacts to fish in their habitats and how those may be minimized moving forward. So next slide. Another example of streamlining comes from the Memorandum of Understanding that BOEM, the Corps of Engineers, and the Texas General Land Office signed this past summer. The agreement formally acknowledges shared mutual interest to facilitate coordination and collaborative investments by which all three will collect and share data and optimize engineering, economic, and environmental criteria to match potential sediment sources with potential projects in Texas. And this agreement has already resulted in cost-shared initiatives. The survey completed in November by the Texas GLO and BOEM is one example of that. So next slide. But more importantly, I want to emphasize that our success depends on our partnerships, and that's everyone here today is involved in that and has become a partner in one way or form through the years. So the ones that are listed on the slide are by no means an exhaustive list. And we're also working to make our process easier to follow. And that's with the publication of a Citizen's Guide to Marine Minerals Leasing. If you are not familiar with that guide, I encourage you to go to our website and download a copy. It's very fascinating. You could even maybe read it to a child and put them to sleep. So it benefits everyone. So BOEM, next slide, please. So we do encourage our project engagement. So what does that actually look like when we say that? For BOEM, that means we've been able to benefit from local knowledge that we've received, particularly during a workshop from Frying Pan Shoals off of Cape Fear, North Carolina. And this area is considered an essential fish habitat and an aquatic resource of national importance, but it does need further study if the sand resources there are ever to be used. So BOEM led a workshop, and the engagement with local community allowed for local and regional scientists to provide some existing data, help us identify where we needed more information. And then from that meeting, BOEM was able to draft an environmental studies profile that is included in this year's study development plan to fill those priority data gaps. And so when funded and completed, the research will be used to make wiser decisions around our sand and gravel leasing. Next slide, please. We encourage you, and we really encourage you. Let me emphasize that enough. There's a lot of different places that you can learn more and to stay engaged. And as the Frying Pan Shoals example illustrates, we all benefit whenever we have shared knowledge. So on the left there, you'll see multiple different ways that you can learn and stay engaged with what's going on with BOEM, our marine minerals program, some of the past work that's been done. And I also encourage you to look forward, check out our website on time to time. The different BOEM's regional sand management working group meetings are really valuable and productive place to provide some feedback, and collaborative spirit just really thrives there, I think. Next slide. And here's my contact information. I'll open it up to questions or ideas for improvements. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I don't see any questions in the box just yet, but I'll just jump in. I know here in Louisiana, it's always tough to try and find accessible sand deposits that can be used that obviously aren't in some kind of spider web of pipelines and other infrastructure.
Right.
How does that look on, like, I guess the Atlantic seaboard or other parts of the country? I know there's not quite as much infrastructure there, but with some of the wind farms and things that are being planned there, does that present any challenges to you guys potentially in the future?
Oh, it absolutely does. And with wind being such a priority right now, and it's a growing industry out in the offshore, particularly in the Atlantic. So really understanding where those resources are is becoming more urgent. And so that's where the engagement, kind of any ideas on how we can collaborate effectively to go and collect more data so that we can update our maps and really understand the character of where these sand and gravel resources are. Is going to be helpful. If we don't know where it is, there's high potential that a wind project's going to come in, get approved, and then that limits our availability for future uses for coastal priorities. And so it's definitely a part of the conversation. I feel like pretty soon I'm going to be a little harpy over it, but it's something to take into account. And any data sources that people have, and that's one of the things that we're interested in with the MMIS system. How can we integrate existing databases, other type of GIS layers that exist into that for availability for people to see, so that we can take them into account as much as possible in the decisions for approving these wind projects. Maybe they just need to be shifted over a little bit, and then everyone's fine. Is that
yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for answering that. That's great. And I mean, I know Louisiana is going to be doing some studies into potential offshore wind as well. So it definitely, it's not just like the Atlantic coast. I think that's going to be a topic of conversation for us as well in the future.
Yeah, we're definitely interested in seeing the possibilities for how oil and gas platforms can be transitioned to be utilized, which may help out companies with their decommissioning costs down the line. So yeah. It's something that's being integrated into conversations. How that plays out in our analysis is yet to be seen, but I think it's fascinating.
Absolutely. Well, on that same kind of subject here, we have a question from an anonymous attendee. How is BOEM working with competing resources in the Gulf of Mexico with offshore oil and gas?
Competing resources. So as far as the fishing industry, that's a constant source.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of competition in the Gulf of Mexico. I guess, well, I don't want to put words into this question's mouth here, but I guess,
Yeah. Well, just in general, anytime we're doing a scoping type of a meeting for the public to be engaged, and there's multiple opportunities whenever we're developing our next oil and gas program, bringing in as many different stakeholders as possible so they can outline for us, because those competing, or I guess the uses of an area can shift over time. And so we don't just want to assume that it stayed stagnant. But it's the more voices we hear, the better it is. And I will put in a plug, if you haven't heard, on Thursday from 1 to 4:30 Eastern time, the department is hosting a forum to go over our oil and gas program. And so if you have an interest in that, I suggest going to the DOI's website and registering for that live stream, because that may affect a lot of things, not just our sand and gravel program.
Well, we have another question here, another anonymous question, but do you know if the Corps of Engineers has used Shoalmate or has used this as a tool in the past for such things as tracking the effects of dredging in coral habitats and or fish species?
I can't cite one right now. My assumption is that yes, they would have. Most of the projects that we've done are in partnership with the Corps for their civil works projects. And so I would think that they would be a big user of that. But okay. No one from the Corps has reached out to me and said thank you. So I can't 100% answer that question.
Here's one more. Says not a question, but I've used the MMIS a lot alongside the FDEP, Rossi. It's fantastic resource and refer to. I'm excited to see how it grows and is improved. So yeah, thank you guys for all your work on that as well.
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure that we've used it a good bit, at least in our marine aspects of our projects. I deal more with the land side of things, so any kind of sand we're dealing with is something that's being pumped in. But certainly, yeah, those resources are incredible for us down here, especially where, like we mentioned before, sand is getting to be a scarce resource in some places.
Yeah, and I'll just say we are interested in providing workshops or demonstrations of the MMIS system. And so if that's something that your organization would be interested in, please reach out to me and we can start those conversations. Maybe there's a handful of different companies that we would do it at the same time, just to save on that, because some people, it may be a little daunting for others. You get in there, you don't know what's going on. The little search help feature maybe doesn't work as well as you want it to, and you just abandon that. And I think we've all seen that with new technology and new platforms, and we really want to avoid that happening. It's a lot of work's gone into it, and we want to grow the program. We want to be able to get as much information and data into that system so it benefits everyone. So if you're interested in that, just reach out and we can start putting something together.
Great. Well, thank you. So we have one more is from Brian Cameron. Not a question, but in response to the anonymous attendee, BOEM works with the pipeline operators to determine the best methods of decommissioning to ensure minerals are available for states, federal agencies, or local governments and not obstructed. So there we have it. There's your answer.
Right. Thank you, Brian. He's one of our superstars.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Well, great. Let's see. I don't see any other questions at the moment, but we still got a few minutes, so I'll give it a second here, see if anyone else chimes in. But again, thank you guys to all you guys are doing. Very, very important work, particularly, I keep harping on it, but Louisiana is an area where, coastal restoration is quite literally a life or death situation for some of our communities. Yeah. So we definitely appreciate all that you guys are doing to help maintain those sources for us to go and build back some of our wetlands that have been lost. And, obviously kind of going back to the Corps of Engineers earlier today, but they just recently released a positive review of one of our diversion projects down along the Mississippi River. So, we're hopeful to see that project kind of move forward and hopefully bring some more natural inputs to sediment and sand and everything into the marshes and help create some of the natural processes that built the levees or not the levees, but the wetlands in the first place. So I think that some of these newer, more innovative ideas are definitely something we're going to need in the long term.
No, and just on the personal side, again, my family, and the majority of them are in Louisiana. So all last season, it's like, okay, well, it's just a coin toss on which cousin's house is going to get destroyed. So it was pretty nerve wracking. And so I definitely feel for everyone in the region.
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, I live in Baton Rouge, so we're not in the line of fire quite as bad as some others, but I mean, we were definitely holding our breath for a few of them that were kind of crisscrossing across us. And at one point, I think there was a potential for two of them crossing at the same time and landing right in Baton Rouge. Luckily for us, it went, they kind of jogged a little left and right of us, but it's definitely always, kind of keep your breath held for a month or two towards the end of the season when the bad ones are coming. So, I guess, we have 3 minutes left, but since there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you and sharing your insight with the Coastal Summit.
No, absolutely. I appreciate it. And like I said, just reach out. We're always looking for good ideas, how we can use your tax dollars more effectively. So
absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. With that, we will be breaking for our game break here pretty soon. But before we do that, we'd like to thank Ducks Unlimited for their support of the game break. Ducks Unlimited, of course, is a very well-known, well-established conservation group. I think that of all the conservation groups out there, they really have solidified themselves in the cultural side of things. I know growing up in the South where there's the Mississippi Flyway, it's a really big organization, has a lot of support, and they've done a great job of really promoting themselves over the years and doing a lot of really great work. They do plenty of of coastal restoration here in Louisiana, but also all the way up as far as Canada and other places. They do a lot of restoration work and wildlife management work, and we really appreciate their efforts.
Ducks Unlimited is the world's leader in wetlands conservation. Wetlands protect our coastal communities from floods, control shoreline erosion, filter pollutants from our water, provide habitat for wildlife, and offer recreational opportunities. To learn more, visit ducks.org.
All right, it's 1:30, or it starts at 3:30. Trying to get my time zones right here. And welcome back to the summit for the afternoon session. Hope everyone had a good break. Before we move into the next portion here, we'd just like to take a moment to thank Norfolk Dredging for their support of the afternoon program. Let's see, we should have a video here to play for them, or a slide. maybe that was it. Sorry about that. So the next part of today's session is the reflections on the 117th Congress and administration. For this, we had a White House speaker who was a possible speaker for us today, Cedric Richmond, who has been a great friend of the coast here in Louisiana through his work as a representative of our state. Unfortunately, he had a last-minute conflict and is unable to be here. But I don't want to diminish our presenter who will be here, though. Garrett Graves, a congressman from Louisiana who, as we've heard in some of our previous presentations, has been a great champion of the Gulf Coast and coasts in general across the country. He's doing a lot of work with a lot of different legislations to help promote coastal restoration and resiliency through his work with BRIC and others. It's just a real privilege to have him here. He's provided us a pre-recorded presentation today because he unfortunately also had a conflict, but we really appreciate him for putting this together for us to bring to you guys, to give you some insight as to what this year's Congress has in store for us as far as coastal policies and practices.
Hey, it's Congressman Garrett Graves from Louisiana, and I really appreciate the opportunity to join y'all for your Coastal Summit today. Wow, 2020 was an amazing year, and very glad that we finally closed the book on that year. Whether it was the fact that we had $22 billion plus disasters that occurred that year, whether it was the fact that we had the first global pandemic in our lifetime, in our home state of Louisiana, we had 5 named storms. We just recently had a freeze, although I think Texas got a bit more attention for it. Of course, we had the pandemic. There were wildfires all across the West. Really just an extraordinary time. And while 2020 really was an anomaly in some respects, in others, it actually wasn't. That was the 6th consecutive year where we've had at least 10 $1 billion plus disasters. I'd call that a trend. We have a flood relief outlet in Louisiana known as the Bonnet Spillway, where we take water from the Mississippi River that drains this huge watershed from Montana to Canada to New York. And we open up that emergency relief valve on average about once every 10 years. And that's a trend that's been pretty consistent since the 1930s. Yet, in about the last 6 years, we've opened it 6 times. And so we're seeing some new trends. You know, in our coastal counties, parishes, and boroughs, you only have about 10% of the nation's land area, but over 40% of the population of the country live in these same counties, parishes, and boroughs. And that number's increasing. So rather than us continuing to shell out billions and billions of dollars in the aftermath of these disasters and picking up the pieces after hurricanes and other weather-related events and wildfires, it makes so much more sense for us to be proactive. And look, that's a message that you've heard from many people for years and years. It's actually more cost-effective for us to step in and make proactive investments in mitigation and resiliency than it is for us to come in and pick up the pieces and spend significantly more money after the fact. In the federal government, we have programs toward resiliency through the Corps of Engineers, whether it's a shoreline restoration program, a beach renourishment, whether it's a program for ecological restoration, flood control, hurricane protection, water management, or it's a program within the HUD's Community Development Block Grant, disaster recovery, where they have a flood mitigation program and other dollars that are spent in the aftermath of disasters. FEMA, the BRIC program, the new program that we wrote in the great legislation that I think finally started pivoting toward being more proactive. The Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018, the BRIC program sets aside 6% of the previous year disaster funds, all for proactive mitigation. Or it's FEMA's After the Fact program, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. USDA through Natural Resources Conservation Service. I could go on and on about all of these different programs, but you know what? They all operate in silos. And the reality is, as you all really well know, you may have a project that's a great project that's going to return a very clear return on investment, but you can either take this money from the Corps or this money from FEMA or this money through HUD's disaster recovery program or other sources. You can't build your entire project by piecing or commingling funds together. We've been able to knock down one or two of those walls or obstacles, but we've got to do a better job within the federal government of determining what the role of the federal government is in resiliency, and then actually not preventing, impeding, but incentivizing the commingling or the channeling of dollars to these top priorities of resilience. And it's what y'all do. In December of last year, the president signed into law the Water Resources Development Act of 2020. And once again, we've made steps, these incremental steps forward in trying to improve the project development and delivery process. In 2018, through the Balanced Budget Act, we were able to provide record funding trying to address some of these backlog Corps of Engineer projects. And so we're making incremental steps of progress toward better performance of the federal government, but you're the practitioners. You're the ones at the end of the line that are actually trying to move these projects forward or trying to build them. And you're the one that's kind of victimized by this dysfunction and inefficiency in the federal family. And so I want to throw something back in your lap. Being the person that's on the receiving end of all this bureaucracy and red tape, what are your ideas on how we reform, on how we do a better job incentivizing the cooperation of different programs and dollars as opposed to disincentivizing it or making it candidly illegal to do? What are your ideas on how we can reform, for example, the National Environmental Policy Act process in a way that reflects the type of project that you're carrying out? And what I mean by that is, if you're carrying out a project for ecological restoration or maybe beach renourishment, where you're returning things back to exactly the way they were, do you really have to do an entire NEPA analysis? Do you have to do a full-blown EIS? Or is there a different way of approaching it where you can really tailor the assessment to the type of project that you're building and the potential threat to the environment? Is there a better way to say, well, we can just do an EA on this one versus, again, a full-blown EIS? It results in us being able to commit more dollars to actually turning dirt construction or pumping sand, as opposed to candidly wasting money on studying, analyzing, or looking at things that really aren't relevant to the type of project that we're building. You know, there was just a decision in Congress to open back up this concept of congressionally directed spending. Years ago, that was banned or prohibited. And many people believe that by by banning earmarks years ago, you suddenly started saving money, and we were perhaps even on a trajectory to reach a balanced budget. And nothing could be further from the truth. When those were banned in Congress, well before I began working as a member of Congress, the money simply went from earmarks to the federal agencies. And so the earmarks didn't go away, they just moved. They moved to the federal agency, and I would argue, and probably a more black box process where you had less transparency. It was done behind the veil of secrecy and less accountability. And so now with that returning, let me say it again, you have a role in helping to work with our local and state partners in helping to identify those projects and investments that are going to result in the greatest return on investment for those limited taxpayer dollars. How can we make investments that will help to improve the resiliency, the performance, the sustainability of our communities, of our ecosystem, of our economy? How can we ensure that the dollars that we're spending are truly investments and not pork? That they're returning something to taxpayers. It's an investment that taxpayers are getting benefits back. So this year is going to be pretty extraordinary. We've already done a bill just recently in the recent days to spend $1.9 trillion, the most expensive bill in our history. Actually tops the spending for World War II, to put that in perspective. Our nation's debt is around $30 trillion. Many people are talking about moving and next bill doing an infrastructure bill. Well, we've just spent $1.9 trillion, or just in the case of state assistance, 116 times the actual loss of revenue from our state governments. So as we pivot to infrastructure, there's going to be a lot of attention paid toward what we can actually afford or not afford, which circles back to efficiency. So let me say it again. Moving forward, one of the things I think you all should be working on is, what is the best way to allow us to efficiently carry out projects commingling funds? How do we make improvements to our project development and delivery process to where we're spending dollars not on navel gazing and studies, but spending money on progress, on things that truly result in better outcomes? How do we put a process together that helps the best investments or projects to bubble to the top, and do it in a way that's transparent and accountable? Look, the challenges that we're experiencing across this country, I'll circle back to what I said at the beginning. Last year alone, over $20 billion plus disasters, 5 in named storms in my home state of Louisiana. These problems are affecting every single one of us. In the Midwest, there may be tornadoes. Out west, there may be wildfires or earthquakes. Certainly in the Southeast and the East Coast, we have great threats from hurricanes. But the reality is that all of us are experiencing greater challenges, weather-related disasters, and we've moved from this kind of dynamic environment of where we live to one that's more static, where we're now communities that live on the coast or in areas without moving according to changes in weathers and patterns. So how do we live there safer? How do we do it in a way that is more protective? How do we ensure that the livelihoods that we all love and enjoy and the future that we're providing for our children and grandchildren is guaranteed to be great like we've had? So that's not something that just people from Louisiana or Washington, D.C. or anywhere else should decide. It's something that every American should be involved in. And you know what? It shouldn't be partisan. It should be something that we're all on board with. So let me just circle back and say again, I want to thank you all for inviting us to participate in the Coastal Summit. I am looking forward to y'all's feedback and ideas, suggestions. Give us the constructive criticism. Give us your great ideas and innovation. But I think it's really important that as we move forward as one America, and move forward in a way that really represents what our country stands for and the greatness that we've achieved so far and the amazing potential that our nation has. So thanks a bunch, and God bless.
All right. Well, we greatly appreciate Congressman Graves for all his work for the coast and for being a part of the Coastal Summit again this year. We don't have a second presentation in this block, so we can move ahead a little bit if that's okay with our presenters and everyone else. But I will just take a moment to mention that some of what Congressman Graves pointed at is there's a lot of issues facing coastal areas, probably more so than ever before. There's a lot of climate-driven issues that we're dealing with, whether it be sea level rise, increased frequency and intensity of storms and other events. So, these kinds of bills that are going through Congress this year are vastly important, and they need the support of everyone here within ASBPA and other organizations to help, make sure that they get through. And so we encourage everybody to reach out to their delegates and their local and state representatives as well, just to make sure that they're getting the attention they need. On that note, I will say that we didn't we tried to get Senator Cassidy or Senator Whitehouse to be a presenter here today, but again, they're dealing with a lot of issues and trying to get their own bill presented on the floor. So I'll just mention that it was kind of alluded to earlier, but the RISE Act. So resiliency and infrastructure, or resilient infrastructure and shorelines, and I forget the rest of it now, but I think it's ecologies and economies. Sorry. So anyway, the RISE Act, basically what it does is it brings an update to GOMESA, which is the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, which Senator Mary Landrieu brought into being in 2006. And what that bill does is it helps take a portion of offshore oil and gas revenue and puts it back directly into coastal restoration and protection projects. Those dollars can't be taken and put into anything else except for coastal restoration. So it's an important bill on the Gulf Coast, especially in energy producing states. What the RISE Act does is it helps to eliminate the cap that was basically limiting how much funding can go into coastal restoration, while also protecting dollars for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So very good things right there. It makes it important to other areas of the country in that it brings in a revenue sharing program in the same model of GOMESA, but for offshore wind farms and renewable energy sources. So obviously in places like New England, where as we heard earlier, the Vineyard wind farm and other wind farms are being proposed and being pushed through, helping to eliminate some of the delays that have occurred on those projects. It's going to bring us closer to more renewable energy, more energy security, and then also again, it brings a lot of funding back to coastal restoration in areas where there's a lot of issues that we're facing with our communities and our ecologies. So again, ASBPA has officially taken the stance of support for the RISE Act. So we'll just say that out here if you haven't heard. And again, we encourage you guys to get involved and contact your representatives and let them know that the coastal health and sustainability is an important issue to you. And with that, if we're good, we can go ahead and move ahead a few minutes early. Our next presentation is by Nicole Elko and Pete Seidel. Dr. Elko has 20 years of experience managing and assisting with more than 20 beach preservation projects along the U.S. Southeast and Gulf Coast. Dr. Elko received her PhD in geology from the University of South Florida after working with the USGS Coastal Marine Geology Program, St. Petersburg. She also serves as the coastal coordinator for Pinellas County, Florida. And on top of that, she's our science director for ASBPA. So welcome to her. Pete is a coastal engineer for applied technology and management in West Palm Beach, Florida. And Mr. Seidel is a project manager with over 20 years of experience providing domestic and international clients with effective shoreline and inlet solutions. So with that, welcome to you guys, and we look forward to hearing what you guys have to say.
Thank you, Jack. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be here at our Coastal Summit. Happy to be joining you virtually. As Jack mentioned, my name is Nicole Elko, and I'm the Science Director for the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association. What I'm going to do is give you a brief update from the science side of the house, and then Pete is going to fill you in on the policy side of the house, so the government affairs things that we work on. And I will start out with just a quick reminder for those of you that may be new to our organization about who ASBPA is. We were founded in 1926, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving, protecting, and enhancing our coasts by merging science and public policy. You can see our mission statement there. We advocate for healthy, sustainable, and resilient coastal systems to sustain these 4 interconnected core values that you see here on the screen. Community protection, a strong economy, ecological health, and restoration. So I encourage you to go to our website, asbpa.org, which is how you entered the meeting today, and explore around a little bit there. I'll be showing you, I think, a screen grab of that now. Yep, here we go. Our mission statement is there again at our website. So if you visit us and you click under Get Involved, you can see some of the committees that are active in ASBPA. So, you know, perhaps this is maybe one of your first meetings or you're a new member. You've heard a little bit about the Students and New Professionals with that awesome trivia hour. And then Science and Technology and Policy, you see those as well. So those are the 2 committees, or the work that ASBPA does that Pete and I are going to be talking to you about today. Also on our website, you can find resources for members, including publications under that tab. That's where you'll find our white papers. Those are written by the Science and Technology Committee typically, and they support the policy decisions and positions that our organization takes. We strive, as you can see by our mission statement, to kind of have our foundation based in science and then advocate for public policy based on that science. So with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the science and technology initiatives that ASBPA has been working on lately. They are listed here. This is kind of an overview of what we're up to in 2021. I'm not going to go into detail on all of these. I will talk in detail about our National Beach Nourishment Database, because we've just published a paper on a century of beach nourishment in the US, and we're really excited about the results of that. And we want to encourage folks to read and utilize that journal publication. Then I'll talk about an initiative that many of you have been involved in over the last several years, and that's identifying our top coastal management challenges for the nation. What I'm not going to talk in any more detail other than this slide about it are the following 4 bullets. So ASBPA white papers. As I mentioned, we try to have the science foundation in place before we go advocate for public policy. And in this particular year, we are about to publish a white paper on US beach water quality monitoring. So that paper is in review with our Science and Technology Committee right now. And you can see some of the co-authors here. This one is led by Angelos Hanides from Coastal Carolina Universities. And there are a number of other contributors from academia, industry, and government agencies. So the next item I wanted to mention to you that we're excited to be kicking off this summer is the Southeast Coastal Communities Water Level Observation System. So ASBPA was fortunate to receive a grant from SOCORA. So that's the southeast arm of NOAA's IUCE program, the Coastal Ocean Observing Regional Association within the Southeast, to help coastal communities with one of their top coastal management challenges, which is coastal flooding. And we're going to be installing water level sensors, low-cost tide gauges, essentially, in a number of communities around the Southeast. And we hope to eventually work nationally with a program like this. So more on that soon. That will kick off this summer. The 4th bullet there, or the 5th, I guess, next to last, is the U.S. State Sediment Regulations Initiative. We're going to be talking to you about that tomorrow. So there's a panel of Coastal States Organization, Army Corps of Engineers, Institute for Water Resources, and myself, who are the partners on this. And we're initiating some work there to conduct some workshops, publish a white paper, and a final report on how states regulate the placement of dredge material, whether it's on beaches or other beneficial in ecosystems. Finally, the ASBPA Science and Technology is very involved in the U.S. Coastal Research Program, and many of you have heard me talk at length about this in the past, so I'm not going to go into that much detail today. I encourage you to visit uscoastalresearch.org if you're not familiar with it, or reach out to me. I serve as one of the co-executive directors of that program. We've just wrapped up our annual call for academic proposals. The proposals were due on Friday, so we're excited to be awarding another $3 million for coastal academic research on topics that are important to coastal stakeholders around the nation. So with that, I'd like to just talk in just a bit more detail about two of the topic areas. First, the National Beach Nourishment Database. If you visit the ASBPA website, and there are a number of items along the right side of the page, the Coastal Universities Guide is there, which is a great resource that the students and new professionals mentioned. The National Beach Nourishment Database link is there as well. And this is an excellent tool that you can go in and explore how your state or your community has been nourishing its beaches over time. It provides a national scale perspective showing us that 476 different communities around the nation have elected to use beach nourishment to address their chronic beach erosion management challenges. And we placed nearly 1.6 billion cubic yards of sand in on beaches since beach nourishment began in the 1920s. So this database is updated by our Science and Technology Committee annually. We're going to be kicking off the 2021 update here in April. So if you have just done a beach nourishment project, please let us know about it so we can update the statistics. This is a community-driven database, so it's only good as the information that you're providing to us. So please send me whatever information you have there. And I'm going to show you just a few plots that came out of the publication that I mentioned. So some really interesting statistics have fallen out when we look at how the US has been nourishing its beaches over the last century. We see that there's been this sort of growth in sand volume placed, which has been exponential over the last century. What you're looking at here on the plot on the bottom is beach nourishment volume placement by decade. So each decade from the 20s through this past decade, the 2010s, and you can see that in the last decade, we've placed about 37 million cubic yards per year, right? We're getting at about 400,000 cubic yards over the entire century. So nearly 40,000 cubic yards each year over the last century. The exponential curve fits this data remarkably well with an R-squared value of nearly 0.98. So this was a really exciting statistic that came out of the analysis. But when you look in more detail about kind of how the beach nourishment placement has been spread out over the nation, you can see that so the plot on the right here shows the top 8 states in terms of total placement over the last century, and New Jersey has actually been the most productive state in terms of sand volume per linear foot of shoreline, okay? But I know this plot's a little bit confusing, but what we're showing here is they've only placed less than 3 cubic yards along each foot of its oceanfront coast annually, okay? That purple line there corresponds with the axis on the right side of the page. So that's your normalized average decadal volume placed, okay? And you can see it's at about 3.0. So although we're placing this exponential amount of sand volume, we're only placing 37 million cubic yards per year, all right? And only like in New Jersey, which is one of the areas with one of the states with a short coastline, and they place lots of sand, even there, they're only placing 3 cubic yards per foot annually. So we're not having to put as much sand on the beaches as the database might reflect. And this analysis really brought to light kind of how efficient and effective the beach nourishment has been over the decades. The plot on the left just shows the volume by state, and those top 8 states pop out at you right away: California, Florida, Louisiana, North Carolina, New York, and New Jersey. So I think this data is fascinating. If you're interested, please visit our website and check out this publication that came out in the Journal of Ocean and Coastal Management on a century of U.S. beach nourishment. And then finally, I'll wrap up my briefing just to remind you and thank you for your contributions in helping us identify the top 5 coastal management challenges in the nation. They're listed here. This was also published last year as an ASBPA white paper on the National Coastal Management Challenges and Needs. This work was partially funded by the USGS, so thank you for your help. The top needs are deteriorating coastal ecosystems leading to reduced functionality as a top management challenge. Second was increased storminess due to climate change. The third, coastal flooding, both from longer term things like sea level rise and more episodic events like the combined effects of rainfall and surge in urban areas. The fourth was chronic beach erosion. And the fifth, coastal water quality, including harmful algal bloom. So this was a bit of a surprising list for us, especially that fact that we were talking to ASBPA members and members from our sister organizations and our chapters around the nation. Chronic beach erosion is sort of our bread and butter, and it was number 4 on our top list. But that's reflective of the needs of coastal communities nowadays, right? Flooding and kind of the ecosystem functionality is something that's of much greater concern. Mostly because we placed 1.6 billion cubic yards of sand on our beaches over the last century, right? We're doing a pretty good job managing the beachfront. So ASBPA plans to use these top management challenges to guide the work that we do over the next several decades, or I'm sorry, the next several years. For example, the white paper that I mentioned that the committee is working on right now on beach water quality monitoring addresses the 5th bullet there, coastal water quality. And then the Southeast Coastal Communities Water Level Observing Network is going to address the coastal flooding bullet. So we look forward to working with you all on addressing your top coastal management challenges. I'm going to turn it over to Pete now, but at the end of our talk, there'll be a slide on how to get more involved. That has my contact information and a little bit about when the Science and Technology Committee and the Government Affairs Committee meet. So please reach out to us, just chat us your email address if you'd like to join one of these committees and you're not already a member. Thanks for your attention. Pete?
Thanks, Nicole. You're always a tough act to follow, big shoes to fill after you present. The two major arms of ASBPA are the Science and Technology Committee and the Government Affairs Committee. Those are the two main arms of the organization. We do work very closely together where we take the science and policy white papers developed by Nicole's and Tiffany's Science and Technology Group and use that to help support our science-based policy. I do want to take this time to remind everybody, government affairs, I want to clear up any misconceptions, notions, perceptions, anything like that. The government affairs is just about Congress and the Corps of Engineers. That is not what we are about, at least in the past however many years. What we are really about, I'm sorry, next slide, please, Nicole. Thanks. What we're really about is all of these agencies. We do a lot of things on Capitol Hill with the Corps of Engineers, but all these agencies, USGS, National Science Foundation, NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, FEMA, BOEM, and maybe a couple others. I apologize if I've forgotten. These are the major things where we're working with each of these agencies on the best policies to increase the ability for you to do projects and address the priority list that Nicole presented. We do a lot of these. The summit, everybody comes to DC for the summit because we want to get engaged with the topmost level highest level possible of these agencies, including the Corps and Congress. You've heard some great talks by the Corps this morning, Mark earlier, BOEM. They are great agencies to work with. We've had a lot of success working with these agencies inside the Beltway. However, we're not just about what's inside the Beltway. Next slide, please. This is what we're also really about. 50% of the population, the whole US population, lives within 50 miles of a coast. Maybe not necessarily a beach coast, it could be an estuarine coast, but 50% of the population lives within 50 miles of a coast. So each coastal state, each coastal county, each coastal municipality, town, is a stakeholder. Everybody attending the summit here is a stakeholder. And I also want to take this and remind everybody, we're not just about beaches. We are the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association. We've been putting much more effort into the estuarine coast and shorelines. Those are a big deal with storm resiliency. And also on that list that Nicole provided, the estuarine shorelines, that was in between the lines of many of those priorities that the members had expressed. So how do we take all of you as stakeholders and the clients you represent, the towns you work for, the agencies you work for, and bring all of this that you see on the coast, these coastal states, including the Great Lakes. This also does circle back to what we do inside the Beltway. It is the knowledge, your experiences of how your projects are getting done, or if they're delayed, or if they're not getting funded, or if they're held up for various reasons. This is your experience and knowledge are what the Government Affairs Committee needs to help formulate the policy that we will take the white papers to support. So I am really asking you as co-chair, the other co-chair is Kathleen Riley. We are asking you to spread this message that everybody here is a stakeholder. It doesn't matter where you live, any coastal part is a stakeholder, and it matters what you do and share that we can do, government affairs and ASBPA can do inside the Beltway. And even at regional offices within this, we've worked with regional NOAA offices, we've worked with regional FEMA offices, regional fish wildlife offices. So I'm really asking you to spread the word and message to your colleagues that please get involved with the government affairs. I am asking you because we do need a larger group to bring in more of your experiences so we can have better effective serve you. The Government Affairs Science Committee, ASBPA, is here to serve you, and we need your help with that. Next slide, please. So yes, there is sort of I'll call it an elephant in the room somewhat. We are in a transition. We were really blessed with Derek Brockbank, who was our executive director for a number of years. He brought our government affairs and his work on policy inside and outside of Beltway. He brought that to the new level and propelled the organization so much forward. His departure is, he still helps us. He still answers the phone when we reach out. Thank you, Derek. We are in a transition. We are looking for a new executive director who's big chunk of their job description is the government affairs. That announcement is on the website. If you know anybody that is interested that would make a good executive director, please share that. Can submit application. There is no cone of silence. They can talk with Tony, they can talk with Derek and see pros and cons of being ASBPA's next executive director. To cover this transition period, while we look for the next Derek Brockbank, Tony Pratt is going to be handling a lot of communication and he'll an agency contact. He is close to DC. I think he's worn out a few pair of shoes on Capitol Hill. He is the best guy in our organization to handle the agency and DC contacts. I myself, as co-chair of the Government Affairs Committee, I was tasked to keep the organizational thing going together and keep the committee moving forward. Kathleen Riley is super smart with and very talented with policy. She is working, she'll review policy letters. We have provided, as was mentioned, we provided letters in support for the GOMESA RISE Act that Jack mentioned. She is in close contact with many of the, not the federal agencies, but various other NGOs that Derek established relationships with. So she is in contact with those, and we are following, keeping our thumb on the pulse, keeping that going. Bill Hansen is a wealth of knowledge of the workings of Congress and the Corps of Engineers. We are leaning on him, and he's a big help. Joan Pope is this incredibly intelligent know-it-all. Anything with projects, especially Corps of Engineers, DC, she has an answer to, or knows who knows. She has a wealth of information that we rely on. And a lot of this is supported by Nick Brown. He is a grad student. He has been incredibly helpful on keeping us doing the, I guess, more secretarial work and keeping everything flowing. Next slide, Nicole, please. So here's what a couple things that were, to give you an actual update, what we're tracking. WARDA, as you know, was passed and signed into law. And next step is to develop implementation guidance. The Corps will be doing that. We were tracking that. We want to work with the Corps. Generally, this takes a really long time. And we would like to work with the Corps and make this implementation guidance be more in the order of months to develop than years to develop. So we're tracking that, and we'll look for ways on how we can assist with that. The Corps of Engineers work plan was released in the past couple weeks, and we are tracking this. This is basically the prioritizes the Corps of Engineers work. We are tracking this, and this is the priority list. However, none of that work will get done without the proper appropriations. Also, in the past couple of weeks, the guidance was released. The Appropriations Congressional Committee released guidance on how congressional members can submit requests for FY 21-22 funds. So if there are projects in the Corps work plan, the members of Congress need to ask for the money so they can write a check. As you may have heard, congressional member requests, affectionately known as earmarks, could be back. I understand that it's been passed in the House. Senate has to consider it. a version of that may come back, right? What we do know, as you may have read, is there is a limit on how many dollars can be spent on an earmark. There's also a limit on how many earmarks a congressman can ask for. So we are tracking this. This is a big deal. We have discussed some pros and cons internally on this so far, and we're going to keep tabs on this. And one of the bigger questions, if earmarks come back, how do earmarks coexist with a core work plan? And that is something to track. As Jack gave you a really good overview with the Go Mesa Rise Act. Yes, we signed letters of support. And this is a big deal for a couple reasons that Jack mentioned. This is important to each and every state because this is largely about revenue sharing of the wind energy. As wind is being put in New England, considered in Virginia, maybe North Carolina, other states, there's a revenue sharing based on Go Mesa, which needs to be refined first off. And we've been working to refine that revenue sharing model, which is going to get carried over into RISE Act. This is a good revenue of dollars for the coastal states to use for their coastal programs. Their coast will have an impact of sorts, and having revenue sharing off that offshore energy would be a good streamline of dollars for coastal programs. It is a big deal for every state. And Cobra, we're still tracking. We had a couple years ago under the direction of Derek, made excellent progress and ability to use sand resources within a Cobra zone for projects within the Cobra zone. Right now, there's nothing too much happening on that, but we're still tracking that. Those are the large updates. And Nicole, I'm not sure if there's a final slide, but we want you to get involved. Please contact us or Kathleen Rowley if you've got her contact information also. Please join us. These committees do not really work well without you, or they're limited to things that only a few people want to do, which may leave you asking, why don't you do this? We'd like to do it, and we'll do it if you join our committees. So with that, I think we have plenty of time for some questions, either for science or government policy.
And if it's okay, I would also like to say something that I failed to say. The chair of the Science and Technology Committee is Tiffany Roberts-Briggs, and I couldn't do what I do for science and technology for ASBPA without her. So thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you guys for the presentation. I don't see any questions at the moment. I will, since while there's maybe a few coming in, I will just kind of apologize. I pretty much bludgeoned the RISE Act, what it actually stands for. I think what I did was I mixed up BRIC and RISE. So just to clarify to everybody, the RISE Act is reinvesting in shoreline economies and ecosystems. So there's not resiliency. The BRIC Act, on the other hand, is building resilient infrastructure in communities. So apologies for that confusion there, but now that we've got that cleared up, I don't see any questions here.
And there is a working group that is following the BRIC Act as well.
Okay, well, great. I see you guys, there's a link here in the chat box to help people find their way to get on some of these organizations or committees rather, and to get involved. And just to echo what you guys said, we encourage everybody to get involved. Your voice is important on getting some of these things passed, and very important for the coastal areas, and it carries over to other areas. Obviously, there's a lot of coastal infrastructure in businesses, whether it be ports or, like you said, the offshore wind that's being developed, other energy sources that have a great impact far inland. So it's not just a coastal issue, although it may appear so on the surface. So we encourage everybody, wherever they live, to get involved with these kinds of things. Oh, we do have one question here, a hand raised. Let me see. Kathleen Riley's hand. Kathleen? Let's see, do I need to unmute her?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. Gotcha.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I work with Pete. I think one of the points I want to make is I work with both engineers, public entities, private entities, everybody to get things to work together and gel to move forward. And I just think it's really important for people to understand that you have great ideas and very creative ideas and solutions that you want to implement. However, there is a process involved in that. And that process, unfortunately, as much as we don't like it, it is what it is. It can be political and it is policy-based. So I think getting involved in governmental affairs, giving us your ideas, we can move forward on it the best way we know how, but it works hand in hand. The ideas are great, but if there's no path to implement them, what good is it? If you have in ways, you know how to implement things and work the policy angle, but you don't have the ideas from the more technical, the engineers, the surveyors, and geologists, and so forth and so on, what good is it? So we need both to work together hand in hand. And I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let's see, I don't see any other questions here. I'll give everybody, I guess, one last shot at getting something in here real quick, but otherwise we can move ahead a few minutes early here and get on to our last few things for the day. And again, Pete and Nicole, thank you guys so much for your insight and being a part of the Coastal Summit.
And
Thank you.
Kathleen as well.
All right. Well, with that, I guess we'll go ahead and move ahead. I don't see any more questions. Oh, hold on. Maybe they got one more. There's a hand raised here. Kathleen again. Well, trying to figure out how to unmute here. Oh, I guess not. Maybe that was the last hand raised still. Okay. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and move ahead then. Thank you guys. Next on the agenda, before we kick off happy hour, we want to give you a quick preview of the ASBPA National Coastal Conference, which will be held in person September 28th to October 1st in New Orleans, the city where it's always happy hour. To give us that presentation is Gordon Thompson. He's our National Coastal co-chair, our National Coastal Conference co-chair, rather. Gordon Thompson is a associate principal and senior coastal engineer at Baird and Associates. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jack. Yes, Jack just mentioned, we're super excited that we're going to be looking at an in-person conference. It's going to be at the Hilton in downtown New Orleans, September 28th to October 1st. We are going to kick that off with our typical short courses. And so those are going to be brought to you by CZF, Coastal Zone Foundation. I want to acknowledge this point, Katie Boucher and Eddie Carter, myself are going to try to lead this effort, but we are looking for volunteers. We have several subcommittees. We have the main steering committee, and then we have sponsorship, which everybody always wants to join. That's a particularly exciting committee that you should sign up for. There's also the papers committee, volunteers, as well as posters. Talking about posters and papers, the paper abstracts are due May 1st, and the posters are due August 20th. And with that, Jack, I'm going to turn it back to you because that's pretty much it. So please mark your calendars, September 28th to October 1st in person in New Orleans. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, and I know we're all excited to be back in person. Not that it hasn't been great to have this the virtual summit today, but certainly it'll be nice to see people in face to face and have happy hours in person again. But with that, we're moving on to our happy hour, and just to kind of give you a little rundown of how it's going to work, you'll have a couple minutes to kind of grab whatever you need. May that be water, coffee, mocktails, or cocktails, depending on what time zone you're in, or maybe your kids just came home from school, or you've been working from home for a year and you just need something. No judgment here on my behalf. There'll be 7 Zoom meeting rooms, each with an ASBPA officer, covering different topics, and please feel free to hop from room to room, meet with people, use this opportunity to interact, mingle, network, and then hopefully, we'll cover some interesting topics in the process. The rooms that are here, Tony Pratt, our president, will be speaking. Phil Rares, I hope I didn't mess up his name too bad. He's VP of Government Affairs. Joan Pope, VP of Science and Technology. Lee Weischer, VP of Communications, Outreach and Awards. Gordon Thompson, who you just saw, who will be VP of Members and Chapters. Gary Jones, the Secretary, and Cameron Perry, our Treasurer. So, pick a room, and hopefully we'll have some good conversations. And again, it's been a real pleasure to be moderator for the first day of the Coastal Summit today. I can't thank the team enough for making it look as easy as it was. If it did, hopefully I felt like everything went incredibly smoothly, and really looking forward to tomorrow and the next day, and the rest of our presentations. So thank you guys so much.
Yeah, and thank you, Jack, for being our host today. I hope everybody saw the little note that we put in the bottom of the chat. The way to access these opportunities to be with our officers is to go back to the schedule and scroll down toward the bottom, and you'll see little buttons beside each person's name. So you can just click on whoever you'd like to join. And as Jack said, we'll just hop around. But thank you all for being with us. And Jack, thank you a bunch today for leading us on our first day here at the summit. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
All right, well, we'll see everybody back in about 30 minutes. Thank you.